Our first item is Karakia, and I'm on these duties. Can I acknowledge Kahu that's given some help for me with my pronunciation? I've given Kahu a commitment, and you're to hold me to it. By the end of this year, I'll be doing my Karakias without paper, off the cuff, and with good pronunciation, with a little bit of help from a friend. Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki wawaho, tuia ki ratua, tuia te hari tani kata, ka nato te po, ka rono te ao, homie huie taiki. We had an apology today from our Deputy Mayor, who is representing us with Wakatu in Denmark on the climatorium and other issues. Are there any other apologies?
I'm happy to move.
Thank you. Apology of Deputy Mayor accepted, moved by Mel, seconded by Kahu. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Okay, can I invite our transport team, Drew and Alec, before us to work through the paper on the update of our traffic and parking bylaws. And just while they get comfortable, can I acknowledge Nigel's back? We got through, didn't we, Alec, during his absence?
We did indeed, but I had no doubt that it would be okay.
You had no doubt. In good, capable hands. I'm just impressed that the Deputy Chief Executive is wearing a tie and the Chief Executive still thinks he's in holiday mode. But we'll get him onto the straight and narrow in good time. Okay, Alec, let's power into this.
Thank you, Nick. And today I've got next to me Drew, and this is a report to look at providing information to adopt the Traffic and Parking Bylaw. As you know, it expires very soon. We went out and did extensive consultation. We heard back from the community, and this report brings it all together with a recommendation to finally adopt the bylaw. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand over to Drew to take us through the finer points, and then we'll be open up for any questions. Thank you, Menik.
Yeah, through the chair. Mr. Levert is exactly right. This is a deliberations report that talks to the consultation that we undertook for this bylaw. In this bylaw, we received 73 individual submissions with regards to the bylaw. Within that 73 submissions, 9 asked to talk at the hearings meeting, and 6 actually finally spoke on the hearings meeting. Broadly speaking, a number of the submissions, most of the submissions, in fact the majority, 48 of them were on the long-term parking of motorhomes. And then there was a number of other points around other elements of the bylaw. The second biggest one being parking on berms, and then a number of points all the way through the document. Within this deliberations report, officers have made some recommendations on how we do or what we do to address the submissions on each of the finer points. Probably the major one is the long-term parking of motorhomes, mobilised vehicles and heavy goods vehicles. A number of the submissions opposed it, 30, 12 supported it. There was a lot of reasons why there was opposing. It was mostly around the motorhomes, and a lot of submissions talked about the difference between a motorhome, or the lack of difference between a motorhome and another heavy goods vehicle, and how they're difficult to differentiate. Officers have looked into all of this, and on the balance of the submissions that we've got, we're recommending that we do remove clause 39, which regards long-term parking of motorhomes, mobilised vehicles and heavy goods vehicles. The other area that we considered quite significantly was the parking on berms. We had 22 submissions about parking on berms, 13 opposed it and 8 supported it. officers are recommending that we retain the restriction on parking on berms. And simply because with all the submissions that we got, no submissions were able to remedy the major issue that we were trying to address, which was damage to routes, damage to footpaths, damage to underlying infrastructure. So staff are recommending that. There's a number of other recommendations, some of them small, some of them are wording tweaks for some of the lesser responses that we got on different parts of the bylaw. But as Mr. Laruda said, happy to take questions.
The way I'd like to structure the debate with colleagues' support is for us to be pretty informal, to work through each of the key topic areas of the recommendations and seeing both, and I'm actually pretty relaxed about a combination of questions and comments, and then see if we can get a consensus position on each of the key topic areas and if there is a strong view to allow a vote. So effectively, my plans in moving it forward was to go through each of the topics, i.e. the motorhomes, then do the parking on berms, then do the time and restricted place, topic by topic, and at the end of it, see if there is a common position for us to land and work through the report that way. Is there any objection to me handling it that way? If that's the case, let's take commentary and discussion or questions on the issue of long-term parking of motorhomes on roads. I had one question. I feared that we'd had a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but I also acknowledge there are some parts of Nelson, and I've noted on some streets like Vanguard Street, where a motorhome is parked, which I'm supportive of. Do we have other tools where there's a clear safety hazard of, in fact, it's not always a camper van, sometimes it's a large truck or vehicle that is parked on a road like Vanguard Street? Do our officials have tools of which we can effectively ask that person not to long-term and semi-permanently park in such position?
So through the chair, just a point of clarification, the clause wasn't just motorhomes, it was also heavy goods vehicles and immobilised vehicles. To answer your question, we do have a clause in the land transport rule that says where a vehicle is creating a safety hazard, we can we do have the ability to be able to move on or recommend to the owner of that vehicle to move it. So we do have that. But this just gave us a little bit more of an ability it gave an indication that those vehicles parked for a longer period of time, and we used 7 days as long term, was just not something that we were looking to do on road space.
Can I just push a little further? Have we ever successfully used that generic safety provision? Is it actually a workable tool for dealing with that situation that arises sometime?
Nick, the items that do come to mind, for example, is where people have parked over driveways. Yeah. And what we then do is through EIL, we go in and have a chat and we monitor that area. It is more onerous because it relies on enforcement and people actually going out and having that discussion. There have been some instances, and maybe Drew can assist, not particularly going into any detail, where heavy trucks have parked in an unsafe manner, and that is usually a discussion between officers, transport officers and the businesses. That has, to some degree, some success, some difficulties. So it is a more prolonged, protracted issue to resolve, whereas this would be a lot easier, to be honest. But as I said, on balance, because of the submissions we received, we thought that removing that clause. But we do have the tools, but as always, sometimes those tools are difficult to negotiate and navigate our way through.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Hi, Jack. My question about parking on the berms, this is a crossover from another bylaw that we had.
Councillor Brand, I'm going to come to the parking on berms. what I'd like to do, as I indicated at the beginning, is work systematically through each topic area. Now, if
Yeah.
mine's the only question on the motorhomes, then we'll make a decision on that and then move straight on to the booms, and you'll be the first question.
Oh, okay. I was just picking up because the staff said that it's more than just motorhomes parking on the berm. So
Yeah, no, sorry, motorhomes or heavy trucks.
okay.
But we're on the topic of long-term parking of motorhomes or other vehicles on the road. I just think it's going to be a better discussion if we go through issue by issue and settle them.
It's okay. I was talking about long-term parking on berms other than motorhomes, but I'll wait.
Yep, the berms issue is issue number 2, and you'll be the first question on that. Are there any question on the large vehicle motorhomes legally parking on the road? Councillor Pakitaki.
Good, Mr. Mayor, thank you. My question is just one of clarity. The way that I interpret it is that existing one is relative to safety, and the one that we're sort of putting in at the moment is one more related to nuisance. Can you draw some lines for me?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, you're quite right. We're talking about long-term parking here. So if we have a large vehicle that's parking in a way that's creating a safety issue, we do have the ability to be able to talk with that owner, and certainly before the 7 days is up. Whereas this is longer-term parking, so it's stuff that's more than 7 days, and then we've used 7 days as the definition of long-term parking. If indeed it was an issue right from the get-go and a member of the public or one of our officers identified it straight away, we would continue to go and have that conversation with those owners of the vehicles. So we are talking about longer-term parking, not just a nuisance of parking that could happen at any time.
Yeah, so I guess to build on that is kind of so that the community at large has a really clear understanding about where they can and what they can and can't do, so that people aren't getting caught out. Where there's a bit of, it seems like on the safety side of things, there's more discrepancy there because of the variability of it, whereas the long-term nuisance side of things, it seems to be a bit more clear cut. How are we going to be able to translate or transmit that that information so that people can easily not get caught out, I suppose, in the first one that's existing at the moment in terms of safety?
Before Drew answers that question, I just want to say we have on occasion where we need to address a safety issue, for example, on a particular incident in a particular place, we may as officers feel the need that we need to actually restrict parking, for example, and put in yellow lines. And then what we would do is we would undertake consultation. We would then bring it to the hearings panel, but that would specifically only address that one particular incident of safety if we deem it to be an issue.
Councillor Sanson, then I'm going to come to Councillor Courtney.
Thanks, Mayor Nix, through the chair. Kia ora, Drew and Alec. So would it be correct to say that the motorhomes are unoccupied? So these are not motorhomes that are being used for the purpose of a primary dwelling. They are a secondary dwelling, so to speak, that are being stored effectively in public parking space. I'm assuming that if people were living in the motorhome, they'd be in some other, that they'd need to be in a campground or somewhere where they're allowed to be living in their motorhome.
So through the chair, look, the clause that we had in the bylaw that we were recommending that we remove didn't actually make the distinction about whether people were living in the vehicle, the motorhome specifically or not. Through the submissions, most of the submissions indicated that indeed wasn't the case. They weren't living in them. It was a storage issue, which indicated to us that it was, they were unoccupied most of the time. The number of submissions did say that there was the odd occasion where they stayed on the road reserve outside of a friend's house or outside of a hotel or something like that, and they were close to being there for 7 days, and they were querying whether that would trigger this issue or not. But broadly speaking, from the submissions, it sounds like they're mostly unoccupied and it was storage only.
So if we were to retain the clause 39, which would prevent the long-term storage of motorhomes as secondary dwellings in public parking spaces, it wouldn't be negatively impacting those who are experiencing housing vulnerability?
So through the chair, it's a good question, one that I probably am not quite sure I can answer fully. Look, it really talks about vehicles that stay in one space at the moment. If they are vehicles that are able to move, the clause as it was written doesn't prohibit someone from actually moving their vehicle a little bit further down the road or something like that.
And then just a quick follow-up question is, I'm curious as to how other councils around the country have dealt with this. Like, have other councils brought in this kind of restriction on, motorhomes as secondary unoccupied dwellings being parked in public space for long term?
Yeah, so through the chair, certainly other councils have made bylaw changes that, or have rules within their bylaws that limit the ability to store private motor vehicles on the road for longer periods of time. Some of them use 7 days, some of them use slightly different terminology, but they generally tend to use it more as a generic. So we've identified motorhomes, but we've also identified heavy goods vehicles and other types of motorised vehicles, whereas they've been just more generic and they talk about larger vehicles in general, or they use some sort of other classification of the vehicle to identify it. We've been a little bit more specific in calling them what they are to try and make the bylaw a little bit more understandable rather than talking about a class 2 or class 1 vehicle. Yeah.
Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Through you, Drew, thank you for your presentation today and the report. Drew, I'm aware that large vehicles, heavy goods vehicles, are required to have a light at the rear, a night light. Do mobile homes have that same requirement placed upon them? Motorhomes, I mean.
So through the chair, I'm completely unsure. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that.
If it's a heavy vehicle, motorhomes aren't. Yes, so for motorhome, it's like a motorhome's allowed to be 3.5 tonne, where any other heavy vehicle can only be 2.5 tonne. I don't know why that restriction is on motorhomes, but once you become a heavy vehicle, whether you're a motorhome or not, you have to have a light,
a night light,
within 6 inches of the rear on the outside.
Well, you're talking about safety, Drew, excuse me, through you.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're talking about safety. I do think that needs to be looked at because, you're quite of one class and you're grouping them here together, motorhomes with heavy goods vehicles. And I think that's an aspect that does need to be considered by a management team, in my judgment. The other point I want to make is that the feedback I'm getting and the concern from the wider community is in the area of narrow roadways, narrow streets, cul-de-sacs and that sort of thing. And that's where the unease from those that don't have them, these motorhomes, that's where the unease is coming. It is quite considerable. So I'll leave you with that.
Yes, so through the chair, as Mr. Lavertus has already said, where we do find an ongoing safety issue with regards to vehicles parking, and in particular narrow roads, we do try and address that with no stopping lines, which would be included as part of this bylaw, but not specifically this clause 39.
Good, thank you.
I'm going to have Councillor Benj, then Councillor Stella. Sorry, Tim.
I've watched with interest several vehicles doing exactly this. There was a huge truck and trailer that parked outside Isle Park.
Yeah.
Obviously the driver lived there somewhere, but where he parked, there was tons of room and it really had no effect on anybody because of where he parked. If he'd parked 100 yards either way, it would have been a major traffic hazard. But where he parked was okay. And I've seen camper homes in our street. One was parked where it wasn't that wide, but he put 1 foot up on the berm because there was the gutter, so a couple of feet of grass, then the footpath, then more berm on the other side. And he put, which made it okay, but if he'd parked on the road, it could have made it a bit narrow. And he used to go away every weekend and come back. And I've seen another one where someone managed to live there for well over a month by not turning on the lights at night. I don't think either of them really caused any problem. And it's about, I think the most dangerous thing is where a car parks beside a driveway, and they're perfectly entitled to do that. And it only needs to be a builder's van or somewhere, and the person trying to get out cannot see, just cannot see. And we're not talking about that. And that's far more dangerous. And I'm not really keen on us getting too involved in this thing. And I know that council staff may well like to have a hard and fast rule so that no one has to make a decision. You know, it's easier if you just have to go out there and you either write the ticket or you don't, sort of thing. And personally, I'd rather there was a human in control with a little bit of discretion who said, you know, you've been here 3 weeks, mate. I know you have. You're not actually allowed to. It's time you found somewhere else to go. I would much rather that approach. And you might like to hear that, because the person doing it is going to place themselves in more difficult positions than if it was just a hard and fast rule. But this is a society, we all live here. I know narrow roads get where it's difficult, but I think we just have to get used to ourselves. Either we get rid of cars, or we're going to have narrow roads where it's you go and then I'll go. You know, they do it in Wellington. They've grown up with it because they had to. I actually think it helps. If there was a bit more of that in Nelson, we might be a bit more courteous to each other. Thank you.
Thanks. And can I just remind colleagues, more than happy to have comments. They're quite helpful. And for me, trying to see where the consensus is, it's not a requirement. I just would prefer to have a very open session, and I'm going to enable our officers to give some feedback as we try and resolve the issue. Over to Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Mindy. I just have 3 questions and then some comments. So I'll ask the questions one at a time. Given that, as mentioned in the report, the situation is kind of evolving in terms of not having parking requirements for new developments. So that might put more pressure in certain areas. You might not want to have long-term storage in those areas. When might this bylaw next be reviewed? Is that scheduled, or?
Just through the chair. Just like all bylaws, there is a review period. Sorry, I don't have that at hand.
Is it required every 10 years?
I should know that. I should know that question, but I don't. But there is a period that we were hoping to do this. One thing I would say is that we don't want to do. We always have the ability to come back and tweak and do things, but we could have to go through a formal consultation procedure. And one thing I am cognizant of, I would not like to have to do that again and again and again. We like to wait for these big chunks and clean it up. And there will always be things that we will need to fix up, and we usually keep those for the next review. But my sincere request is that we don't do that many iterations, because it's time consuming.
Aaron's is a good question in the sense that we need to think about how long is it going to be with the other changing of the rules around it.
Yep, I can
So
actually
have somebody
answer
just,
that question.
could we just have somebody check out legislatively? I think it's 10, but I would like to get a definitive answer for Councillor Stella.
Yeah, and I did just ask for that reason. If we lock something in now and the situation is changing, we want to make sure we anticipate changes. Second of 3 questions. So we're dealing with motorhomes, heavy vehicles, trailers, and so on. If we consider the case of a registered functional car that's left unmoved for a period of time, what are the rules around that? Is it similar to this?
So through the chair, unless we make a modification to this bylaw, cars would have no restriction from parking for longer than 7 days.
Okay, thank you. And we're defining long term as 7 days here. I'm sure the longer we make that period, let's say it was a year, there'd probably be less tolerance, I think, to the proposal. We would say, well, we don't want people storing a motorhome or a trailer for a year. So there must be, and I guess if some people are leaving it for 7 days, they might well be leaving it for a month, for example. And it's a bit of a hypothetical. Your recommendation is to not take on this part of the bylaw. If it was 28 days rather than 7, do you think you might have a different view?
So going through the submission process, we did have a number of submissions, and 7 days, and on a number of submitters, they felt that wasn't long enough. They thought that was too short to be referred to as long-term parking. So staff have taken that on board. from our view, if it was a longer period of time, I think a number of the submitters and their responses probably wouldn't be valid, or the way that they justified their submission wouldn't be valid. So yes, that is something that could be modified to make that clause more acceptable.
Thank you. If I could just make some comments.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah, I think regarding the submissions of 48, 30 opposing, 12 in favour and 6 with alternatives, certainly take account of those. I guess it's the nature of this kind of consultation, very specific. We are going to generate a lot more interest amongst motorhome owners and so on than the general public. So we should take that into account as well. And then there are alternatives like, for example, discretionary monitoring or so on. But I think that's problematic and probably not workable because then everything's contestable. Perhaps there's the option of identifying safe spots or places to park as well. But as it stands, I'm not really, I would rather have the restriction than not, for the reasons of safety and just not really wanting to encourage long-term use of public space for private storage. So I would rather the clause was in there.
Okay, and that's really helpful for me, for colleagues to give an indication. Are there any other questions from colleagues? Yes, Councillor Sanson. I'm sorry. I did miss Tim had his hand in, and I'll come straight to you, Rachel. Sorry, Tim, I missed you in the corner.
With this rule, and there's certainly a few more questions after today, what drove this rule? Have you had many complaints about camper vans on the side of a road?
So through the chair, we have a number of customer service requests, and the Motorhome Association did ask for that information. The customer service requests weren't that high with regards to motorhomes in particular, but we did have a number of other ones that were heavier vehicles or larger vehicles parked for a longer term on the sides of the road. In addition to that, though, it's staff's own recognition or driving around and identifying things that were making it tricky that weren't captured in their service request. We don't have that data because it wasn't recorded. It was more informal and observed. But the Motorhome Association did have it. I think it was something along the lines of 12 in the last 5 years service requests for motorhomes that were causing a safety issue.
That seems incredibly small over 5 years. Couple of year, I imagine we had more parents' cars that was abandoned or blocking because of driver.
That's indeed true. Sorry, through the chair, you're exactly right. There was more. I don't have the figures at hand, but cars that were left that couldn't be moved on the side of the road causing an issue was much higher than motorhomes in particular. And we also had a number of, as I said, heavy or larger heavy vehicles that were left on the side of the road for longer than 7 days. That were also the information that we pulled out was specific to motorhomes, not caravans or trailers, but motorhomes specifically.
And this what we're looking at strictly is motorhomes or something, or we're including heavy goods vehicles.
So through the chair, the clause wasn't just motorhomes, but that was what a lot of the public picked up on. It was motorhomes, heavy goods vehicles, and immobilised vehicles.
Okay. So I was just trying to justify this because I'm not seeing that there was any request or issues from the public or the neighbourhoods of motorhomes or heavy goods vehicles. They say officers saw things on their travels. What would they, just understanding, and obviously I know what they're looking for, but if public hadn't said, hey, this motorhome's blocking my view, or I can't get inside, why is he parked in front of my place? But officers are seeing, what sort of issues were officers potentially seeing?
So through the chair, look, I don't have the data at hand, but anecdotally, it's when we were trying to do something ourselves, like we were doing roadworks or something, and we were finding a motorhome was parked on the road, and just finding someone to be able to move it so that we could undertake the maintenance. And then and then observing corners, intersections, and driveways, was that either staff were using or driving the roads and just identifying a safety issue created by a much larger vehicle, including motorhomes.
Okay, I won't question it more, but were you surprised to see there's quite a response here, 48 submissions and 30 of them oppose the proposal? Was that sort of unexpected? Were you expecting from an officer level, were council expecting more submissions and agreements with this change?
Through the chair, to be fair, we didn't quite know what to expect from it. We knew that the Caravan and Motorhome Association is an association, and they have members, and we have heard a lot from them, the membership of that. I think that's a lot of the feedback that we got was through those channels. I was surprised we didn't receive more submissions on other types of vehicles, as I said, immobilised vehicles or heavy goods vehicles.
I tend to think they're taken care of quite well when there's a vehicle being left abandoned, stolen, or just a nuisance. I tend to think, well, from anecdotal I see, it gets people pretty quick to say, hey, I think this vehicle's not supposed to be there, and council will be pretty quick to get it moved in the interest. For you, Mr. Chair, I think you're after a little bit of response.
Yeah, I am.
My view, and it's reinforced today from what I expressed at the meeting, is I don't think there's any need to stop abiding motorhomes parking on streets. I think public self-police a little bit. They want to be in good neighbours, and they're sort of conscious of where they put it. And as we're changing some of these, or not we, the government changing some of these national bylaws, it's getting a bit more difficult to park. May become more difficult to park in new subdivisions inside your own property when you don't have that parking space. And I think it's very much part of the Kiwi culture at the end of a long, hard working week to go, let's take the family in a camper van and go. And they don't have the camper vans forever necessarily. So I tend to think this is unnecessary. Great that the staff had put it out there to see if there's a response. If they sense there could have been an issue, it's shown to me very clearly there isn't an issue. And I think it will just create an issue if we change it.
Okay, thanks for that indication.
May I just come in?
I just want to get clarity on when, to Aaron's question, is that if we say no to introducing this bylaw, when would the council realistically have another opportunity to consider it?
So under the LGA, all bylaws need to be reviewed 5 years after the day they were first made, and then every 10 years after that.
So in respect of this, when
we are out of time in November.
We're out of time in November.
Indeed, we need a new bylaw.
Because it's a new bylaw, we would be required to review this effectively in 2028.
From the day it's
from the day it comes in.
From the day today, if you
so it would be 5 years. It's not like we're adjusting a bylaw. This would be the category of being a new bylaw.
Yes.
So it would be 5 years would be the next opportunity. Yes. I do want to try and bring the discussion to a conclusion. Councillor Sanson's got a suggestion, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Bench. And then Councillor Hodgson. So Sanson, Benj, Hodgson.
I'll just hold my comment for now. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Benj.
Alex, through the chair, from what you just said, if we don't change the bylaw, then we wouldn't be waiting 5 years for the next review. Is that? It's only if we make a new bylaw, it has to be reviewed within 5 years. So if we don't change it, we can just review it whenever we want.
No. My understanding of the law is that we are writing a new bylaw. We meet the 5 year criteria. And so this would be reviewed in 5 years' time, is the way I'm interpreting it, but I'd be happy to take from officers so that we're clear. Do you agree with my assessment of the interpretation?
Through the chair, that's correct. We actually have to make a bylaw. If we don't put a new bylaw in place, then we have no bylaw to fall back on. So
it disappears.
Yes, correct.
This one will. Okay. We will have no bylaw in
the wisdom. The wisdom of Parliament has said when you make a new one, you've got to review it after 5. When you've just reviewed it, you only then have to review it once every 10. This is new. We'd have to review it in 5. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. The distinction that Councillor Pakipaki made between safety and nuisance was quite helpful for me. I think if on a nuisance basis, officers were having to review situations more than monthly, I would be quite concerned. And I'd be wanting to have quite a sharp bylaw. If it's not that frequent, then I feel like it's maybe unnecessary for now. But I would like to know that on a safety basis, officers have the tools they need. Just thinking of pulling out of driveways and stuff, making sure there's line of sight. If in those instances, officers can quite quickly and easily address those situations, then I'll be happy. If not, then maybe there's something we can review there.
So through the chair, if it's the safety, we try and work with the owners of the vehicles. The tools that we have for us don't give us a lot of leeway to actually be able to enforce it per se. So we do take a pragmatic view with the current owners. If we want to actually make a change from a safety perspective, then what we end up doing is put no parking lines in, which captures all vehicles. But as you know, it has to go through that public consultation, so it does take a little bit longer. So if we were trying to address something really quickly, we don't have anything that gives us the teeth to do it straight away. But broadly speaking, enforcement officers, when we talk to owners, we generally tend to get good, I won't say compliance, but good feedback, and we're able to move things on. But to actually make a physical change or to actually enforce something that's a little bit more challenging.
Can I just push James's question a little bit harder? I'm a not particularly compliant person. I'm bullish. I've got my big camper vest. It's parked quite lawfully, but it actually is a real big pain for the safety of my neighbour pulling out. Do your existing tools. I'm within the zone. I'm quite lawful. Does the other rule that I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion give you, at the end of the day, if you try and talk to me nicely and I say, nah, what I'm doing is within the law, does the existing tool give the capacity to require me to move without changing the lines for everybody? In other words, I do think there are spots where it is safe to have a normal car, where it is not necessarily safe to have a large bus. And my real pointed question coming through from James is, at the end of the day, if they are a uncooperative citizen enforcing their rights, can you actually force the case with your existing provisions?
Through Manic, no. It would be very, very difficult. We rely on the goodwill. We'd have to bring something back through to the hearings panel, and that has its own procedure. So no is the short answer.
Thank you. Councillor Brain, then Sanson.
Thank you. Just on the storage of motorhomes in here, sorry, I can't remember exactly where it was that I read it. I didn't write down the point, but it was about Nelson City Council investigating options about storage or looking into, and then feeding back to those submitters. What responsibility does Nelson City Council have around providing or investigating storage facilities for camper vans and trailers and all of that? And then I've got another question.
So through the chair, the council has no responsibility for investigating those things. It was just in response to this in storage. If it was to be implemented, then that might be something that we could use to ameliorate the not having enough space on property to park these larger vehicles.
Okay, so on a side note, it basically, here's a business opportunity for someone to go and start a storage facility for camper vans and trailers if we impose this bylaw.
So through the chair, I just need to really make a quick, I need to clarify something. So trailers are separate. Trailers are under the Transport Act not able to be parked on the road for more than 7 days. So that includes caravans, boat trailers, and just trailers in general. So that's out of our hands. It's already in the land transport. What we were trying to do was to align other nuisance vehicles with that same land transport rule.
Okay.
So to go back to the question, trailers already exist, so yes, there's probably a business opportunity for that. But camper vans, larger vehicles, and mobilised vehicles, potentially.
Okay, and we don't cross over into the freedom camping bylaw by only having 7 days. And what is 7 days? Is that Monday to Sunday, or is that 7 days from when it comes to Nelson City Council's attention that there's this vehicle parked there?
Well, I wish I knew the camping bylaw better than I do. I don't believe it does. I don't believe it causes conflict with the freedom camping bylaw.
So I don't believe it does, no.
Okay. And the 7 days, sorry, is that Monday to Sunday, or is that from when it comes to our attention, and 7 days from the date we are aware of it?
It is just 7 days from when the vehicle was first parked there to, yeah.
We'd have to have we'd have to have proof that it was there, and what we would ideally, I think we wouldn't take a hammer to a small nut issue. We would go and speak to the people, but then we would, if it was longer than 7 days, then we would we would take the soft approach first. But then if this was approved, then we would go to the next.
Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, me, next through the chair. So I'm just wanting to clarify, the proposed clause 39 would actually bring consistency with other, like with trailers, so trailered vehicles, which is caravans, boat trailers, trailers. So motorhomes would be treated the same way as caravans and boat trailers and other trailers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so through the chair, that's correct. That was the intention of talking about this within this bylaw, was that it brings consistency around caravans. So we were trying to understand, why would a caravan not be able to park on a road, but a camper van can? And so it would make it more consistent.
Okay, and then the next question was, safety is talked about in the report in terms of, it seems to be for other vehicle users, like exiting driveways and that kind of thing. I'm curious if there's any view from officers on road safety for other more vulnerable users, like walkers and cyclists and scooterers and that kind of thing. I'm just anecdotal, my personal experience of navigating the roads on a bicycle is that you often have wider vehicles.
That's right.
Like camper vans and caravans and that kind of thing often encroach into cycleways or the go over the parking line into the road. So actually when you're on a micro mobility, you're actually often forced out into the traffic. And I'm just wondering if there was any view on that from officers.
Yeah, through the chair, probably not so much for pedestrians, especially if the road environment had a footpath. Where we have local roads that don't have a footpath, then yes, there's probably a valid concern with pedestrians. But cyclists and other micromobility that are using the road space, they would also have the same safety concern as what other motorised vehicles would have. Yes.
So I'm just going to signal, and there may not be support, but I'm just going to signal that I would actually support us retaining clause 39 in the bylaw.
Okay. Can I just give a perspective from the chair as to where I'm sort of seeing, and what I'd like to indicate to councillors is, in moving this one forward, was just get a bit of a show of hands, and then I don't feel really strongly. I think here's what I think is the tension. There's a whole lot of Nelsonians out there that get to their later stages of life and go see the great outdoors and get a camper van. And some of them have room on their property to store it, and some don't. But they get a huge amount of enjoyment, and it's part of the Kiwi way of life of joining the grey nomads. And I've got a lot of respect for them. They're responsible, in my view, members of our Motor Caravan Association called us, minimal problems around freedom camping and those things. And if we introduce this law, what we're going to do is to make it harder and more expensive for those people that have camper vans to be able to have one. Effectively, we're going to require them to either pay someone to be able to park it somewhere, and I know there are spots that do that, and that's one side of the tension. The other side of the tension is there are neighbours and people in streets where people permanently park their camper vans or their trucks in exactly the situation that Councillor Bean sets out, and it does encroach on the road space. There is some distraction for neighbours of having a permanent vehicle on that road parked there, and this would give greater tool. So I think they are two. We've got a tension between different values. On balance, I think our officers have got it right, and that is, it is not so much of a problem that it justifies a bit of the sledgehammer to crack a nut. And that's why my position is to prefer it. I am a little bit persuaded by the fact that I think as our community intensifies, as the rules that the government has introduced where we cannot require parking on new subdivisions, as that clocks in over the longer term, I think we're going to have to revisit this. But given that we do and are legally required to review it in 5 years, I don't think those changes in our community are going to occur that quickly. And I suspect that in time, a rule such as this is required, but I think it's overkill in the short term. That is where my preference would be to go with the officer's recommendation. There is an alternative that I think I heard, and I'd just like to check with those that would prefer we retained it, is I did hear a signal that rather than 7 days, you could make it 28 days, which would soften it. And so if you ask me, I think the two possible options going forward is to take the councillor, the staff's recommendation and not proceed with this new clause 39, or soften it to 28 days and proceed with it. Could I just check with those that were indicating they supported retention of clause 39, whether they would prefer, when I do my show of hands, that it be at 7 days or 28? Councillor Pakipaki.
Can I just ask a real quick question just on the safety thing with the officers through the chair?
Yeah.
Do you have, without this clause, do you have the ability to be able to address safety issues if they come about?
Yeah, through the chair. We don't have the legal mechanism to address the safety issues that these larger vehicles are creating. But
so the answer to that James's question, you've further teased out, Councillor Pakipaki, is they can use their powers of persuasion and good neighbourly, but if it actually comes to a stubborn person, that actually they would be able to stand by the law and say, actually, you've got no capacity to require me to move. And that tempts me a bit more towards the other position. Councillor Sanson, I'm assuming your preference is for retention, but with changing to 28 days.
I just, if I may ask the officers one question. No, that's fine. If we were looking at the retention of clause 39 with either 7 days or something greater, 14 or 28 days, would that still, and do the officers think that that would, having, let's say, more lenient, so a longer time period, let's say, argument's sake, 28 days, would that allow officers, would that give officers the tools to address the safety issues, the road safety issues?
So through the chair, a longer period of time would do a couple of things. One, it would make sure that it would address the concern that vehicles are just being abandoned there. So because there is still a time limit. But if you went to 28 days, then we have to, observe it for 28 days. So we can't address it for a longer period of time than what 7 days would. So if there was a significant safety concern, it probably wouldn't allow us to address the safety as fast as we could if it was 7 days. But it would address the longer, effectively just abandoning a camper van there as a permanent way of storing private property on the road.
And then can I just ask one follow-up question? Like I've seen people's trailers on the streets and stuff. I didn't actually realise there was a bylaw that prohibited or restricted leaving trailers on the street for more than 7 days. So would it be a case that control of that or any restriction is only applied if it's identified as a nuisance? I'm assuming that the traffic control people don't go around looking for trailers. So are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, I can. Through this year, no, you're right. We don't go hunting for trailers that have been there for more than 7 days. It's really if it's raised with us through community, or if we come across it as part of our daily duties, and we need to make a change to move it on because we identify something safety, or we need to move it because we're undertaking maintenance or something like that.
So in effect, adopting the clause 39 wouldn't overnight mean that people have to stop parking their motorhomes on the street. It would mean in reality that if it was identified as a nuisance or a safety issue for the neighbourhood or for council undertaking duties, then it would be addressed. Is that correct?
So that through Menick, that would be in the first instance, because we don't go around driving all our roads every day looking for potholes and see where the trailer's parked. So if that's brought to our attention, then we would act. Or if we see something on our way to work over 7 days, and we would probably initiate that process if we see that. But we wouldn't be going looking now.
We've had quite a lot of debate on this, and we've got other items. I deliberately have allowed quite a lot because in my view of the issues we've got this morning, this is the most contentious, but I want to draw it to a conclusion. My suggested way forward is, I think, just doing an informal show of hands, if people were there. I'm going to take Councillor Hodgson, and then my intention, just as a heads up to councillors, is to do a bit of a show of hands to find a way forward to giving where we decide on this. Councillor Hodgson.
Would it be possible to have the clause as it's written, but at the end, exceeding 7 days where it poses a line of sight, road encroachment or other safety issue? I ask that because I don't like the idea of a bylaw, which we mostly don't enforce. And I feel like this would give you the provision that if someone raises it, then, and it's quite easy to say there's a line of sight issue or not, I would imagine, then you could enforce it.
So through the chair, you could. In reality, if it was creating a significant safety issue, we'd be trying to address it before the 7 days, because we wouldn't want it sitting there 7 days creating that issue.
I actually wrote 3 days as a
Yeah.
for that, but I don't know if that's the case.
So can I check, would officers be supportive of an amendment of the sort that Councillor Hodgson has suggested? Or do you think that just gets into the grey zone? The three options that I was going to give to council would be your recommendation, not proceed, your recommendation, but adjust into 28 days, or you 7. So
Yeah.
you passed me a note with 28.
I know, but it was a
No. So I'm just trying to. It's very helpful, Rachel.
Yeah.
So I think there's we're now narrowing down to the officer's recommendation or the original proposal. Would officers support a sort of a modified form of only where it posed a line of sight risk around the 7 days?
So through the chair, if this was to be included in the bylaw, our recommendation would be that we stick with the 7 days, and it's simply so that it's in line with the trailers. It just means that there's some consistency with it. It helps with the public perception, and it just helps as officers, knowing not the 28 days for this type of vehicle versus 7 days for this type of vehicle. If it was to be included, we would recommend the 7 days so that there is consistency.
So, okay, we're going to keep the 7 days, and I think we've got a reasonably clear choice between, and I think they are both perfectly valid. It's about this, tension of how significant you think the issue is. So are councillors happy for me, rather than having moving of formal amendments, just us to have a show of hands and then include them at the recommendations at the end in line with that? Good. So what I think the two choices are the recommendation that says that we don't proceed with clause 39. That is that we effectively leave it to the discretion, noting that, and I think the arguments for that is that we get to bite it another 5 years. The problem's not big enough. It is a bit. And then the counter view is to proceed with clause 39, which is actually the officers need the tool to be consistent with the other rules. I sort of see those as the balance. So those that would support the recommendation of, sorry, Rachel?
just because the status quo, I think you gave three reasons in support, and then the other one you only gave one. So I think there's also road safety issues, and there's also constraint on parking issues, which we're already seeing, as well as
I think that's
consistency with.
Okay, so I think the weighing up is it a big enough issue that we need to have this extra restriction? There will be some negative effect on motorhome owners and others. The truckie wants to park his truck on the side of the road. He'll feel that it infringes on their rights. I think the other side of the argument is actually there is examples where there are some safety issues. This is about putting a private vehicle on the road. And I also think there's a valid argument of consistency with caravans and trailers. Is that a fair summing up of the balance of views? Councillor Benj?
Nick, this is only for if they're there permanently for 7 days.
This is that we're
So
sticking with 7 days.
If the truckie parks overnight because he's not allowed to drive for 12 hours,
Great.
That's not a day.
Great.
Yeah.
These are making money if the truck's not on the road.
Councillor Skinner, look, I have been reasonably loose on this because my opinion has changed and evolved as we've teased out the various aspects, but I do want to now bring it to a conclusion through a show of hands. But I'm happy if councillors, just as Councillor Sansa and I have done, want to sort of express a view about the balancing of views. Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, just concerned it's getting a little bit, not complicated, not a word, it's getting a little bit.
I'm being a bit
murky.
loose and I plead guilty.
It's processes, I think, getting a little bit off. I understand what you're trying to achieve. I think we've got to take in consideration everyone's views during a debate time. That's what debate is about. One debate is what you get. And just on that, just to be clear for a question, if we're still in question time rather than debate time, in regards to line of sight and view and safety, I am correct, am I, that if someone parks within a metre of a driveway, they can be removed or should not be parked there. So there are already rules that very clearly govern that. And when you design roads and you do consent to buildings and when you decide where parking spots are or not to be, those are clearly considered. Obviously, there's tweaking as we happen. So I tend to think we're trying to solve the problems up there, and with trying to be a bit creative on various solutions, we're getting into very poor decision making. But just coming back to that 1 metre rule, is that correct?
That is correct. Where there is an access way, vehicles are not allowed to park within 1 metre of the access way. We don't put markings in to do that because otherwise we'd be painting paint everywhere.
And that works incredibly well. People, try to look out for their neighbours. If they haven't, I've overseen that. I've seen it firsthand. Someone calls, says, I can't bloody see up outside my driveway. It's a metre. He's on a parking spot, but it's a metre. He's on a parking spot. It's not a yellow line, but we're in a metre of a drive. The officers come out or contracts come out and tow the vehicle away. Problem solved. So
if anybody else wants to express an issue, we're effectively debating officer's recommendation or status quo. I'm happy to have that. I have been informal. If I wanted to operate this section absolutely strictly, then we'd be debating all sorts of issues all at the same time, and I'd be strictly requiring amendments. And I actually do think it's better to do it topic by topic and informally this way.
You'd only get one debate from one person, one at a time, and be very swift.
Well, I've actually found the informal discussion actually reasonably helpful, but let's draw it to a conclusion. Is there anybody else that wants to express an opinion before I ask for a show of hands? Those that would prefer the officer's recommendation, which is the status quo, and deleting clause 39 from the draft bylaw, please just give a show of hands by an indication of hand. This is the officer's recommendation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tim, you.
Views of debate discussion. You're asking me to support the new clause.
I'm just going to ask for an informal show of hands to clarify the recommendation, whether those that support the officer's recommendation or those that would prefer we stuck with the original bylaw. My view of the two choices. So I can just again, so I can clear, informal show of hands for those that favour the officer's recommendation. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those that prefer to maintain the existing bylaw, the existing proposed bylaw.
Hang on, sorry, I'm a little bit confused. I'm confused now. We don't have a bylaw in place.
No,
the current bylaw at the
we have a
moment,
report before us. Let me be very clear. We have a report before us, which is the officers recommend that we don't proceed based on the submissions.
Right. Okay.
And so those that support the officers' recommendations, again, so we're clear, I think there are 8. Those that would prefer we stuck with the bylaw as consulted, there are 4. And so when I put the resolutions at the end, those that prefer not to go with the officer's recommendation could call for a formal vote at that stage if they wished. Let's move to parking on berms, and I promise the floor to Councillor Brand. I'll be a little bit stricter this time so that we don't, so that we can move the issue through. So the issue is the parking on berms, and the officer's recommendation is to proceed with clause 37 as proposed. And Councillor Brand has the floor.
Thank you. Is this also including vehicles up with for sale signs and stuff? in this part, or is that a different discussion?
I'm sorry?
Is this part also including vehicles that have for sale signs and stuff, or is that a second?
No, that's further down. I'm strictly dealing with.
No, that's all right. I just want
to. report. It is paragraph 6.
No, that's all right. I just want to be clear.
6 to 18.
I just want to be clear because sometimes they are parked on verge and berms. And I just want to make sure I have the discussion in the right place.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Verge and berm seem to cross over many different topics. I've got 4 questions. A couple of them are street specific, but they can apply to other streets that I'm not aware of. It's just these are the ones that have been brought to my attention. One of them is Kanini Street, one of them is Jenna Road, and the other one is on the fringe of the brook, and I've just forgotten the name of the street, the inner city fringe. And we had a submission on that last term about the enforcement of parking outside for longer than 7 days when their vehicle had repairs and they were waiting for parts, and they ended up with parking infringement notices and then a threat for the vehicle to be taken away, but they were waiting for parts to come for repairs. So I just want to get really clear about how we create different bylaws and the impact that it has, but how this then comes into this and the confusion that might be created. So the Jenna Road and the Kanini one, a lot of people park on the berm or on the footpath because the narrow roads that we've talked about before. The recent bylaw that we did about bus stops and things like that, Jenna Road came up and there was a number of submissions, but it became aware that the emergency vehicles struggled to get up there. So there were some parks that were going to get removed. We've had a few notifications and a few emails from the residents up there that more than they were aware of parks got removed. And they talked about how they would have to park on the berm because their house is up the hill, or they'd have to park way down the hill and then walk all the way up to get into their house. So how does... Because in here you talk about Nelson City Council applies exemptions and has the discretion to work with residents. So how does that tie together with those residents in that space, considering that it was a different bylaw that sort of had implications of removal of parks?
So through the chair, I'll just get this out of the way first and then talk about berms. So this isn't referring to parking on footpaths. So parking on footpaths wouldn't change. So if people are parking footpaths, that is clearly goes against the bylaw. Bylaw as drafted. So if there were people parking on the footpaths with even a couple of sets of wheels on the footpath, we would be trying to enforce that. But in parking on the berm and Jenna Road, you talked about a number of roads, but where they were putting a number of wheels up onto for whatever reason, the bylaw as it's drafted would not allow that to happen unless we specifically put an exemption in. Okay. At the moment, it's the other way around. So you can park on berms unless we specifically say that you can't park on berms. This flips the default status to say you can't park on berms unless we tell you you can explicitly park on the berms. So if we had a situation like Jenna Road, where we are recommending that vehicles put one set of wheels up on the curb and onto the berm a little bit to create the pathway for bigger vehicles like emergency vehicles and buses to go through, then we would clearly put an exemption in there to do that.
Okay. Has that been considered in this situation since the last bylaw hearing panel that talked about the removal of parking outside because of bus stops and that, and the flow-on effect that we've now had from the Jenna Road residents?
Through the chair, I'm not quite unsure what your question is, but those two things are slightly different. So the panel that that staff brought to the panel some changes to the road markings. This bylaw would give effect to those road markings of no stopping lines and things like that. So if this is adopted and it goes into force, and we wanted residents to be able to park on a berm area because we think it's the right thing to do, we would come back to the panel come back to the hearings panel with a recommendation that we put a sign up that says that the parking on the berm or putting the wheels on the berm is allowed.
Right. So with this bylaw, if it goes through as is, the residents of Jenner Road or Canning Street could then come to council for an exemption to have that sign put up to say that these properties here where parking has been removed because of the lines on the road, they could park on the berm.
Oh, absolutely. So just like any, we get the community coming to us saying this situation exists. Can you consider it? And we will consider it just like we do any other request that we get.
Right. So I know it's a crossover and I know we're talking about this, but I just feel that this is where the two meet. Have those conversations and those remedies been presented to the Genero residents that were impacted by the parking outside their properties, been advised that they could apply for an exemption?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Then my next question is, that will follow up, is about the guy on the inner city fringe who ended up with all the parking infringement notices because he's waiting for parts for repair. How are we enforcing or what is the cost and the reality of actual enforcement of going out and monitoring those areas? Because he lived just behind the central school, just before you head up the brook, and he had ended up and taken the parking infringement notices. He ended up seeking legal action to have these this counted, or whatever the word is, so that because his car had legitimate reasons for parking outside, he was waiting for parts and it had been there longer in the same spot for longer than 7 days, and it was outside his own property, even though it's an on-street parking and it's available for everyone. So how does that then get addressed in here? Because I saw the clause about the repairs and parking, but is that at the discretion of the enforcement officers, or how is that actually enforced, and what does that actually mean?
So through the chair, I assume you're talking about in this situation, the car was parked on the berm while he was undertaking repairs.
It's a narrow street.
So the bylaw does talk about repairs not being undertaken on the road, and the berm is still on the road. It is within the road reserve, so that wouldn't be allowed unless, and there is in the bylaw there, unless it needs to happen in order to be able to get the vehicle functioning, so it can actually move to a better situation. So that would indeed be the case. If a vehicle was parked on the berm because it needed to undertake something to be able to move it to somewhere more suitable, then a conversation will just happen with the enforcement officer and the owner of that vehicle.
So it was clear it was not an abandoned vehicle as it had been indicated on the parking infringement notice, because it was waiting for repairs. So how are we going to tighten up on that when the owner of the vehicle explains? Because I couldn't understand how that would be followed up based on what's in this clause about the repairs and that. And it got into quite a contentious matter. And I'm aware that there were a few others around, like in Milton Street and Canberra Street and other places, where they too had started receiving infringement notices because neighbours had said the vehicle had been parked there longer than 7 days and but it was outside the property owners.
So I don't know these situations that you're talking about specifically. It's outside of my knowledge.
But I'm just trying to figure out how we manage that.
But at the moment, as the current bylaw that we have at the moment, vehicles can park more than 7 days in one spot. So they wouldn't be getting an infringement for parking more than 7 days. They may, however, be getting infringement because they're undertaking maintenance activities on the road reserve. I'm not sure what the specific issue was, but just like any specific issue, enforcement officers do try and do the best to work with the owners before we actually enforce. But if it's not being complied with, or they haven't come back with a valid reason, then enforcement does happen.
Okay, so my next couple of questions follow along. On 7 Sharp, there was the incident of where the limited accessible person walking on a footpath, and the car came up and was crossing the footpath, but in the driveway, and they had to walk around and stuff like that. So because they had numerous cars parked up the driveway, so this one had come up, it goes away but comes back, and it's there daily, but it's not there consistently for 7 days, but it did park slightly on the berm by the property. we talked before about safety and about visibility and things like that. So how does that get addressed? Because watching the program 7 Sharp for that person, there wasn't actually a follow through from the council. How would our council address that? Because I'm aware we received submissions from, I know on some other matters, but from our low vision people.
I think, through me, Nick, I think we've reiterated on many times that I think we would, in those particular instances, we would take that complaint on its face value. I think if they showed us that there was photographic evidence, for example, then, as we've said on many occasions, I think our parking enforcement would go and have a chat to try and move that forward, as opposed to taking enforcement action immediately. So this is just a tool that will allow us to be able to address those issues. That we would go and talk to them and try and resolve that issue, as we would normally do on most of the issues.
So our current tools don't enable us to do that, and that's what this tool will provide us, or we can currently do that already?
So through the chair, you've talked about two issues. Parking over footpaths currently is not allowed. So if a vehicle was parking on a footpath,
it's sort of over both.
Yeah, but if it's parking on a footpath, then that is clearly in the current bylaw and maintained in the draft bylaw that we've got here, that will continue to be talked with the offending party, and if not resolved, then enforced. This difference, what we're talking about here, is where it is on the berm, so not specifically on the footpath. If a vehicle is parking on the footpath and on the berm, then they're on the footpath, so there is it is against it. But if it's just purely on the grass verge or on the berm, then that's what this clause is trying to address.
Okay, and therefore parking on the berm, if it's outside the inner city or city fringe, are we then increasing our resources to go and monitor that, or are we reliant on the people in those neighbourhoods and streets to actually bring it to our attention?
So through the chair, probably more the latter, requiring people just to draw it to attention. But again, as infringement officers are driving around looking at other things and they spot something, then they can take that action if needed.
Okay. I've got one area of nervousness on this, and I think the principle of what you're doing is reversing the onus. And very supportive of that. And my view is that in the bulk of our urban areas, actually, there's good curb and channel and good provision for it, and it's the exception beyond the term. But where I want to push a little is in respect of our rural areas. And it was drawn to my attention when myself and Aaron had a public meeting out at Walkabout Walker, and one of the people raised this question with me. I've been out to 40th and 50th birthdays in the areas like Cable Bay Road and the like, and I do wonder whether there is a difference in the rural environment. That is, I've been to lots of events out the north end of Nelson where there isn't really design for it and the way it's defined. And I wondered whether just adding the words, except with the council's prior written permission, the person must not park a vehicle in an urban area. I do wonder whether there is a difference in those rural communities. I know that this bylaw is very common in city councils. It's not common in rural areas. What would council's officers' attitude be to a tweak to having it simply apply in our urban parts of Nelson City?
So through the chair, a couple of things. You're quite right. There's parking on the verge. I'm using the word verge rather than berm, in rural areas that are grassed, not because we are trying to maintain a grassed area, but because it's just the natural form of a non-sealed space of the road reserve.
Yeah.
So it's not a berm per se, and so we probably wouldn't try and enforce that because it's not a planted berm. But to your suggestion of actually adding words to the effect of around urban areas would probably be fine to clarify that.
My view is that a strict interpretation of the wording the way it is. I go to a 50th birthday party at Calvert Bay. I see 20 vehicles quite safely passed on effectively the grass associated with the fence. And do I want to make that in the bylaw court? No. Do I think it's appropriate to park on the berm in an urban area? I'm with you. That was just a subtle shift. And I don't know what other attitude. Are there other questions or comments from colleagues? Councillor Rollo, then Councillor Bench.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, and for you. And just on the parking on berms issue, in Tahunanui we have a common theme every summer where you literally have hundreds of cars parking on the berm because we don't have enough car parking down there. Is there any way we can will we be looking at putting signage down there if we follow through with putting this bylaw in? And just following on from that, it's quite often, and I was out at Sexton's Field last week playing football, and there's literally hundreds of people there on a given Saturday. Is there any way we can prohibit this bylaw from getting into our recreational reserves area where we simply don't provide enough car parking for the people that are participating at these venues?
So through the chair, just in the report 6.17 tries to address that. We just note, because that came up from the Tahunanui community, and we note that it is in a recreational reserve, and what we're talking about here is for the road reserve, so that would be outside of what this bylaw is enforcing. So it would be up to the recreational reserve plan about whether they either allow or not parking on the reserve.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm with the councillor on this one, but I also am with officers from the point of view the right place to address it is when we do the recreational plan for Tahunanui, and given he's the liaison councillor, he's going to fix it.
Sorry, just through the chair, sorry. So we wouldn't be trying to enforce recreational reserve through the road and reserve bylaw.
Can I just test with councillors? Is there support for my suggestion of limiting the application of the prohibition on parking on berms to urban areas? Are people supportive of that, or would they prefer the status quo?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to add in 37.1 of the actual bylaw, the words must not park a vehicle in an urban area on there. And other than that, I think we're getting close to, I'm pretty supportive of where officers are wanting to go. Councillor Skinner?
I prefer the status quo. Don't support the urban
definition. You prefer to
keep it
everywhere.
I'm happy to listen to more debate when it comes around.
Okay.
Before I confirm my view.
Yeah.
Change my mind.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Bench?
Thank you. So in 616, it says a vehicle can be on a roadway if he or she can park on a road margin without damaging ornamental grass plots. I guess that's upper class speak for a lawn, is it? Okay. Flower beds and planted margins. Does that mean that you can plant shrubs and flower beds on the berm? Or is that the wrong assumption?
So through the chair, no, this is straight out of clause 6.2 of the Land Transport Act. We're just acknowledging that we weren't trying to talk about whether berms could be planted in different types of things. It was just pointing out that, that as you talked about, ornamental grasses are kind of that, what we're talking about, lawn area or grassed area or something like that.
So you can't park on a lawn?
This is effectively saying that if there's a lawn area associated with grass, you can't pull your car up onto it.
Which means you can't park on a berm.
Correct. That's exactly what we're saying. We're saying that if it's gravel, if it's tar seal, you can park your car. If it's grass or cultivated any other area, no, you can't.
But why are we trying to stop people parking on berms? Because it's already there.
So through the chair, what we're just pointing out is that it's broadly speaking in the Land Transport Act. Oh, sorry, Land Transport. Sorry, I apologise. Land Transport Rule. We have a bylaw that currently allows it. So what we're referring to is that our bylaw would default back to what the status quo of the Land Transport Rule is.
Okay, I'm not in favour of having lots of rules that you can club people with, and I'd rather see that the council has the right to mark places where they don't want anyone parking on the berm and
which is the current status quo.
yeah,
That's a fair position.
and leave everything else alone. I had a neighbour who had a car with no wheels for well over a year, which turned into 2 cars and then a third one on the road. And I think it was his source of income was repairing them, and he repaired the ones on the road, and then a trailer full of rubbish, which got bigger and bigger, and then a huge flock of seagulls because he was putting his kitchen rubbish in there as well.
Okay.
And I just went and talked to him and said, I didn't go and say, do you know who I am? I'm quite sure he doesn't know that I'm a councillor. And just said, you know, mate, this has been here a long time, and it just disappeared. No, it wasn't. But yeah, I'm not
comments or
real
questions.
in favour of changing.
Yep, and I think that's quite a legitimate position, Councillor Skinner.
I've got those 200 apricot trees I talked about last term to find a place to plant. Some sunny street, go some sunny streets.
All right, can I indicate, I think there are 3 potential positions on this, and again, I'm just going to do it by show of hands. Staff recommendation as is, staff recommendation with my suggestion of limiting it to an urban area, or the view that Matthew has expressed, actually leave it as it is, and if we're going to prohibit berm planting, then we need to specifically put up signs, which is the existing rules. Councillor Skinner?
I'm just asking why.
I'm going to do it by a show of hands.
I thought you were just doing that.
No.
I was impressed that I was voting for everything. I thought everyone was going to vote for your last.
So I'm going to give councillors 3 options, and if there is not a clear majority, then it is going to be a preferential vote. I'll drop off the bottom one and then put the last remaining choices. So the 3 choices, just to be clear to colleagues, officers' recommendation is option 1. That is that we are going to restrict parking on those berms and areas. Option 2 is yes, we are going to do the staff's recommendation, but we are going to limit it to urban areas and not apply it to the rural parts of Nelson City. Third option is status quo, which was the position that I think was fairly advocated by Matthew. Those in favour of officers' recommendation as is. Those in favour of officers' recommendation but limiting it to urban areas. Those that favour status quo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. I'm taking that we are proceeding with recommendation but limiting it to urban areas. Let's take a 5-minute break. When I return, we'll be on to the last 2 issues. A adjournment for 5 minutes. through the remaining issues a bit more quickly. We did take some time on those first couple because they were a bit more contentious. I slipped in my chairing duties and did not formally ask for a declaration of interests at the beginning of the meeting. Is there anybody that wishes to declare an interest relative to the agenda today? There is not. I also wish to move the adoption of the minutes from the meeting of the 23rd of June. Is there a seconder for the adoption of those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Courtney. Any discussion on those minutes? I'll formally move their adoption. Those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I do note that our Deputy Mayor is at a pub in Denmark, and I hope he's shown his ID, and is observing the affairs. And I'm not sure, given that he is in a pub and may have been consuming alcohol, that we should allow him to vote. But he is observing our affairs. We move to time and payment restricted, which is the discussion on items 6.19, and officers are recommending just a refinement of the wording around the time and payment restricted parking zones. Is there any questions or comments on the time and payment restricted parking zones? Councillor Stallard.
Thanks, Medic. Just a quick comment about the clarification. So 6.23, the highlighted text. So you're parking the space, you leave, and you come back after 40 minutes. So the time has started again from scratch, essentially. If there was a first hour free, do you get a first hour free from then or not?
So through the chair, yes, in the situation that you've just described, you would get your free hour again.
So it seems to be, my reading of the amendment in yellow is that the time starts again, but you don't get the first hour free again because it ends with do not apply. Have I read that wrong?
So through the chair, the intention wasn't to try and limit the first hour free again, but I get your point. We just need to clarify that through the chair, if it's okay, and if this amendment is adopted, would you be happy with us to work through to make sure that's clarified as part of the...
I think Councillor Stallard has caught you on a double negative, and that actually the do not should be does. That is, if the person moves the vehicle, they come back more than a half an hour later, then any extension to parking such as the 1 hour rule does apply.
So through the chair, I believe you're correct. We've got caught up in our own language.
Yeah, that's all right.
The English language gets us again.
We're taking as read just the topographical error, and the do not replaces by does. Any other questions on that? Councillor Sanson.
I would actually prefer to seek further clarification of that. Whether that is actually the intention.
See, the key words for me, Councillor Sanson, with it, and I'm happy for the officers to comment. I don't want the person just being able to move from one park to the next and being able to get their extra hour. That to me seems to be making a mockery of the intention of the law. But remember, this is more than 30 minutes after. If they leave and they come back, well, then they're entitled to it. Sorry, Councillor Sanson.
Yeah, so I kind of thought that with the pay by park app, you got 1 hour free per day. So I think it would be not every time you move your car. So I go into town in the morning and then I go home again, and then I go in 45 minutes later, and then I go home again, and then I go in another 45 minutes later. I don't think I'd get an hour free every single time. So I think we need to clarify.
Officers, can you provide some clarity to the good question from Councillor Sanson?
Through the chair, so we can't. We've looked at each other and we've kind of we're not sure on this point. We'd have to go away and confirm that.
Can I just ask a pragmatic question?
Yeah.
If I move on to the other items of the agenda, is it possible for one of you to get clarity from the staff question? Because I would like to get clarity on that point for us to be able to consider the change. Is that possible, or is that not going to be possible?
To you, Nick, I think it's both. We both need to put our minds to this. This isn't one or the other. We will need just to take a short break.
You'll need a
short break.
A short break? Okay.
We can move through the issues and then come back to it.
So can I suggest that one of you stay, one of you sneak away and see if you can get clarity on that issue, and I'm going to move on to the others, and when we get clarity on that point, to come back to it. Is that?
No. What I'm saying is that we both need to confer to get clarity on the issue. There is nobody that we can speak to at this point.
Oh, is that right? Okay. All right. Was yours a related question, Councillor Brand? Yep. Let's further pursue it.
Okay, thank you. So just with that, is this to address areas that don't have the parking meters like we have in the inner city, like Strawbridge Square parking in Stoke, where it is the manual enforcement with the chalk on the tyres?
So through the chair, the reason that we put this clarification in as part of this bylaw was so that the parking enforcement officers actually had some clarity about what constitutes someone who's just adjusting their park to try and avoid something versus someone who's actually genuinely gone away and come back. And so by putting the 30 minutes in there, it just clarifies that if they return within 30 minutes, it's really just reparking. But if it's more than 30 minutes, they have gone away and come back.
Okay.
And they haven't just moved their park to try and avoid a time restriction or something like that.
I think it's good to get clarity on this because there is some confusion and some animosity happening out at Stoke and Strawbridge car park area where business owners have gone away for 2 or 3 hours and then come back and receive parking infringement notice for over parking. Yep. And they've actually gone away, done their business and then come back 2 or 3 hours later. So I feel that the clarity and making sure that this is very clear would be very helpful.
I have the same view. I'm going to stop at Shawbridge. I forget what the wife told me in terms of what I was meant to get. I go home, I go back again. I think I should be allowed to have it again. Where somebody's just changing car parks to get around the rules, then my view is it's a reasonable restriction. So I'm pretty supportive of it, but I'd still like to be able to get the clarity to Councillor Sanson's question, and I'll come to her and then Tim.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. So I'm on the council's car parks and pay-by-plate meters page, and it says really clearly that parking fees after the first free hour will be at the rate of $2 per hour, and it applies. So Nelson City Council offers free parking for the first hour when parked in the city. So my understanding from last term on council is that as a council, we decided that people would be allowed 1 hour of free parking in the city. So if I come in and I only spend half an hour and I go home and then I come back, I still get my second half hour free. But if I come in and spend an hour and then I go home and I come in again, because I'm using pay by plate and it is registered, it's an app that's registered to my registration number, I won't get another free hour. Otherwise I could get 5 free hours in the day potentially if I just went in and out all the time. So I think that the bylaw as it's written is the correct interpretation of what we of the status quo.
I think what you're highlighting is that this is a liberalisation. Is that if we adopt this, it does change it. That's the way I'm interpreting it.
Only if you take out the words "do not."
Yeah.
Wait. Do not in any first free hour.
I'm going to come.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If officers have got comment on this, so we can get clarity as to what the point is.
So
feel free to do so, and then I'll come to Councillor Skinner.
So through the chair, I think Councillor Sanson is right that the intent with pay by plate was really over the course of the day. And I think this is why we've added this little section in here, because we've got to stay with that already agreed to policy, I guess. And so this was trying to actually clarify that. I apologise. I led you down the garden path by suggesting it was another 3 hour when I think indeed what Councillor Sanson is mentioning is in fact true.
Okay, that's good. Councillor Skinner?
Cheers. That's spot on. I clearly remember this because this was put in 10 years ago. I remember moving this motion. It was for 1 hour free parking to try to counter the free parking that was perceived in Richmond, to give 1 hour parking. It was very clear back then that was 1 hour for the day. If you came back, there was no default or reset. And since then, when we've had the parking by plate machinery, it's enabled to be very clear that if you park for 15 minutes, you can do 15 minutes, you can go away, pick up the milk that you forgot, Nick, come back and do another 15 minutes, but you don't get it starting back to zero. So that plating made it a little bit more flexible. So it's 1 hour per day, and that's what it was for the last 10 years.
So through the chair, appreciate that clarification, Councillor Skinner.
Okay, Councillor Stillard.
Thanks. And just a bit more to hopefully help clarity here. So this sort of amendment with a clause, this is to clarify stuff that's already in there. So it's meant to help simplify things. It's not introducing new things. And just in terms of what it applies to, if we consider the case of when a main car parks in town, that's one thing. But would it also apply to somewhere where there's no fee applied, but say it's a 90-minute zone? And I guess we're talking about the 1 hour free, but that's just actually not what it's all about. You were just trying to clarify that as well. So in the case of somewhere you don't pay at all, but it's 90 minutes, it's just distinguishing between the case if you leave the park and go back within 20 minutes into that zone, or as opposed to 40 minutes. They're two different cases. Is that correct?
Yeah, so through the chair, it is really, this whole clause around the 30-minute away time is trying to pick up on predominantly time restricted parking. So that's parking that's free to use, but it is time restricted. What we do have is a turnover of parking. People are advancing one park forward or something like that to effectively repark. And by adding the 30 minutes in there, it actually makes it clear that you've got to be away for 30 minutes and return to actually be reparking to get that time restricted parking again. I think, I'm sorry, I'm just rereading and just trying to bring myself up to speed here. By doing that, because we have time limited parking that is also paid parking, we just got into a little bit of a conflict there, which this highlighted area is trying to resolve. So
through the chair, I wonder if you, in terms of that highlighted, if you just had a full stop and made it a separate sentence in the case that it's a 1 hour free area or something, this applies. That might separate it out.
So can I just push you a little bit, Drew, and say, having heard this discussion, what is now your officer's recommendation on this provision, as is with that minor text change at the end? Is that correct?
Through the chair, we accept that the text is correct, or the intent of the text is correct, and we just finalise the wording in the bylaw with the CE as part of the minor alterations to aid clarity.
So stand by your recommendations, and we've got the very clear on the intent. And with the Chief Executive's power to do a minor tweak and just deal with the issue that was originally raised by Aaron. And I'm comfortable with that, and I am keen to make progress. I'll take Councillor Benge, Skinner, then Hodgson.
Thank you. And thank you, Aaron, for trying to clarify that, because that was a lot of my question. There's no difference between when you park with the free hour and when you park when you don't. But the example given of you use 15 minutes of your free hour and you come back and use the rest of it, there's no record of that. That's unenforceable. I'm just working out my next excuse. That nobody knows when you left. They might have your number plate and so, but nobody knows when you left. So you can't take 3/4, use 15 minutes of your free hour and come back and use the rest of it. That's not a possibility.
So through the chair, what we're referring to is if you use 15 minutes of your free hour, you go away for 10 minutes and then come back and use the remaining 35 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the issue in Stoke, which Trudy alluded to, there's a couple of businesses there, one in particular, which employs a heap of kids, and they're open long, long hours. And they don't allow them to walk home. And their bus timetables and things don't suit a lot of them, so they pick them up and they take them home. No one walks home after sunset. So that, and amongst other things in running a business, they're in and out a lot. And basically there's no number plate recognition, it's just a car park, and there isn't really any way for those people to prove that they've been going in and out all damn day. It's very difficult for them, and it's an important part of them running their business.
I think it is, but if you ask my view, Matthew, I think we have an issue in Strawbridge about workers car parking.
Quite possibly.
And it's a little bit in the city as well, but I think that's a bit separate to the bylaw, and we need to have a separate discussion. And I know with the new supermarket development there, I think the amount of activity at Strawbridge is going to continue to grow. And I think we are going to, and I think there is potential as we look at that Stoke Hall major reserve for us to give a bit more thought as to how we accommodate workers car parking in Strawbridge. But again, I think that's separate to the discussion about a practical enforceable bylaw for our staff.
Well, all these things sort of come together because
they do.
Most workers park at Green Meadows because there's no restriction there.
Yeah.
And so you see them all park there and then walk to work. And I see further down here, we're talking about allowing freedom campers there as well. Well, it's not an endless size car park. So it does all link together in a way.
Okay, I do want to ensure we make progress. I want to keep the debate quite narrowly focused on those recommendations in section 6 to 19 through to 6 to 23. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you for that. And looking at, thank you in 6.23 on page, whatever that.
Page 9?
9. And you've highlighted in yellow the clarification. Just getting that right, the wording, trying to get the wording right, and you understand what you're doing. Have I found a hole in the matrix, a hole in the parking matrix here, which would be quite handy. You could get 5.5 hours free parking in parts of town, maybe Strawbridge Square. You make use of a 90 minutes free parking, 90 minutes restricted parking spot. You go away and use 30 minutes of your 3 hour just along. You move back after half an hour back to that 90-minute spot, which has then been sort of reset. You go away for another 30 minutes to make up use of your whole hour that you enabled. You come back and make use of that 90 spot again. Suddenly you've got 120 plus 90, you've got 330 minutes parking, which is 5.5 hours. Free parking. But just for trouble, but making the downside, you can prepare to jump out from your coffee, move your car down to that normal park and come back. Well, when I had a small business in town, this is 20 odd years ago, I found a couple of loopholes to park in town with my business. Can't get away with that now. But actually, this is quite a good one. But I think you're trying to remove that loophole, which I never quite realised existed in that matrix flip.
Sorry, through the chair.
I'm not too sure if you're enabling it with that in yellow or you're disabling it.
No, so through the chair, that takes into account the places that we provide. That there is a fee for parking, but we also provide the 1 hour free parking. So Strawbridge Square, which I think is what you're referring to.
I wasn't referring anywhere, but if that works, yeah, I'll have a look at that. Yeah.
No, really, it's just around providing clarity to our parking officers. At the moment, they can get into some debates with car owners about whether they are just moving their car or whether they have genuinely come back or not. So to give them a 30-minute definition just aids them in that conversation. And the bylaw is intended to just aid that so the public know what's regarded as reparking versus just moving your car, and staff do as well.
So, but I see it as quite legitimate at Stoke that I pull up and get my massage, and get my hour. And then in the afternoon, I come back and pick up my prescription and I do another half hour. I don't have a problem with that. What I think is absolutely correct and why I think officers' recommendation is sensible is that we do want to get round the person who just is effectively parking all day and just moves it to a different park. And I do think that is a difficult situation for our enforcement officials. And this says, no, you've got to leave for more than half an hour. You just can't move from park to park. That's why I'm supportive of what they're wanting. Any other topics? Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, just a quick clarification with the paid P180 parking zones, where such as Buxton Car Park. So if a person were to work in town, park for 3 hours, go home for lunch for half an hour, come back and park in town, my understanding is the bylaw would allow this. My question is, I'm not sure whether the Pay by Park app will actually let you pay another $6 for the second lot of 3 hours. I feel like it's fine. The bylaw is good. I just wonder how that would work in practice with the system.
So through the chair, I'm not aware whether the app allows you to do it. So you probably know more than I do. I apologise. I couldn't clarify that for you. Okay, thanks.
All right, I do want to keep us moving forward. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through me. I just like to support your request about having a separate discussion about the Stoke car parking issue and the staff, because there are businesses now that have installed cameras to show and provide evidence that they have actually left their car park, so that they can then provide the evidence to refute the parking infringements that they are receiving. And I feel that that is a step a little bit too far when those businesses provide such community service and, extra pressure on businesses that don't need it. And I feel that that wider discussion would be warranted, and I feel that it would be good to have that within the community.
Thanks for that. And so I think it's a bit of a note for us to take offline and to find a vehicle for that discussion, a very constructive, and there's a number of us that have got a common concern in that area. I'm going to assume, unless there is a distinct otherwise wish, that we proceed with the officer's recommendation on the issue of time and payment restricted parking zones. People comfortable with that? Yes, let's move to restricted use of wheeled recreational devices on footpaths, of which Councillor Hodgson, with his motorised skateboard, should be declaring an interest. It's not motorised? No, this is my leg. All right. The officer's recommendation is that clause 22, just in the interest of keeping progress moving forward, I'd prefer to have contributions where people are uncomfortable with the recommendation or need clarity. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I know that speed management of those devices are an issue for people who are walking using their feet on these footpaths, and it has become a contentious issue. By enabling, and I don't know if the central government has actually defined also the difference between the wheeled or the motorised scooters and things like that, because that was going through Parliament last time we had this discussion. But it does become a safety and hazard issue for those that are less able, whether they're have limited vision, whether they have mobility issues, balance issues, whether they've got different items that they use to help move themselves around. And it is actually a deterrent for them to get out and live in the community that they would like to access. So how does this address those concerns that were raised, some by our submitters, but also by people who are sitting out there actually waiting for the central government to define a speed limit for those motorised items, because they didn't have one, and sometimes they can get faster than the 30k that we have in our central city, restrictions for vehicles, but we don't have that for motorised devices that help people move around. So how does all of that get addressed? I know it's a big question.
So through the chair, that is a big question. Broadly speaking, we have to apply the land transport rule around this. Land transport rule, as it's currently drafted, we know that there's there is discussion through Ministry of Transport and other ways to actually change, tweak and adapt things. They haven't done that yet. We don't know if that's going to happen. So, but where we currently sit is where we currently sit. Currently, you're allowed to use wheeled vehicles on footpaths as long as it's under a certain size. Now, that certain size tends to be so that if you had a toddler that has a walk run cycle thing, Councillor Hodgson might be able to help me what it's called. Balance bike, right? They could,
Oh, you're so youthful, Councillor Paki.
tend to be okay because their wheel diameter is under that, but an adult or a teenager or adult size wheel tends to be over that, and it's not allowed on the footpath. What's happened in, I guess, since the law has happened is we've had a slew of other wheeled devices come in. Some of them are motorised through electric, as in e-scooters, e-skateboards, e-wheels, add e to whatever you want, and that's included in there. Their wheel diameter tends to be less than that, and so as the current land transport rule is, they are allowed to operate on the footpath. So that being said, that's what we're talking about here, is to actually, through the bylaw, actually having locations that's decided by council resolution to be excluded, prohibiting those recreational vehicles on the footpath. So that's what this provision allows, is council to, by resolution, exclude those wheeled devices to be on the footpath. If we didn't have this, then it defaults back to the land transport rule, which means that they can go anywhere as long as their wheel diameter is under that certain size.
I thought this made pretty good sense, and it's really just giving us additional powers rather than actually determining the areas where we restrict. I'm going to go Councillor Skinner.
Oh, I hadn't finished, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Brand, let you complete first.
Yeah, so with the submission that we received from our youth council and about how the younger people now move around the city and about climate change and everything else, how does that then support and assist that?
So this clause actually doesn't try and support, it doesn't try and determine the areas that we want things or not. That is by council resolution. It just gives the council the power to be able to do that. Strictly speaking, and this is what we are hoping that the central government will actually try and provide some clarity around, that through different mechanisms like cycle paths, that those wheeled vehicles can be included there, which they're not allowed to at the moment, because this is before these wheeled vehicles came into play. So we wanted to get some clarity from central government. We don't have that at the moment, and so we are recommending that we include this in the bylaw to be able, again, council through resolution, to be able to restrict where we deem it to be appropriate.
Councillor Skinner, then Sanson.
Thank you for that. In a little bit of direction to the chair, I support what we've got in here upon hearing other views. And I understand that small wheel scenario, which was great, because if you've got a young kid, 5 or 6, and you're alongside and the parent, I thought, maybe I got this wrong, I thought there was an age group as well, like under 12 or something. You had to be under a certain age as well. Was that?
Through the chair, I don't recall an age in there, but certainly there is a wheel diameter.
Okay, and the other thing, I was also aware that the central government, whether they changed or not changed it about 3 years ago, were looking at enabling on the footpaths, and we're saying that now we're going to enable it. Any footpath, you can cycle, skateboard, etc. But you as a council now then have to say where you can't do it, which then, so has that come into play as well? Have we got this issue, or was that not come into play yet?
Yeah, so through the chair, you're right. 3 years ago, they did initiate this, and they did go out for consultation. I'm not sure if Nelson City Council actually submitted on that.
We did.
Okay. But nothing has come of that.
Okay.
So nothing has changed.
This is not preempting. This is not preempting this. And I'm also aware, and I think as you've got in there, we made it very clear, preempting that rule and currently for issues at Trafalgar Street, etc. You can't go if there wasn't any confusion up and down. My view, supporting what you've got here, my view is strongly that if skateboards and motorised scooters are great fun, and I've used it coming into town, etc. And if you're smart enough, confident enough, and you should be using the road for those. There are times if you're quickly dodging the footpath, there's trucks coming each way and you're worried one's not going to see you, you think, oh, we're going on the footpath and come off. But generally, doesn't sit with me that it's going to be safer as an adult over 15 to use footpath because I'm worried about the traffic. Your footpaths are great for walking. There's nowhere very far that you have to walk or bus. If you enjoy cycling, skateboarding, or many motorised scooters like myself, you have the confidence to understand the road rules and you get on the road and you dominate your spot on the road and cars look out for you. So I'm very supportive of what you've got here.
Guys, I'm very much in the hands of council. We were scheduled to go through at 11. I want to get this piece of work finished. I am going to be a bit stricter in keeping us on topic. The simple question for us, in the bylaw, do we want to give ourselves the power to limit these vehicles in particular areas? It's not deciding on any particular areas, all it's saying is should we have that power? And I think it would be pretty hard to argue against the officer's recommendations. So I just want to try and push progress a little bit faster unless there are clear issues with the recommendations that have come from our officers. Councillor Sanson, then I'll come to Councillor Rollo.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that once the existing bylaw expires, is discarded, if we adopt this recommendation, we will have the powers to pass by council resolution restrictions, but no restrictions will currently apply until council passes a resolution. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. The Schedule 1 of the current bylaw is tagged to the current bylaw, so there would have to be a separate resolution to include or exclude locations.
Yes, so I'm just signalling that I'm happy to support what the officers are proposing. I have concerns about restrictions in terms of little kids in particular on wheeled things, but that's for another time to discuss.
When we get a specific proposal for a resolution, we can make sure that we address those sorts of concerns. Councillor Rollo?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a bit confused there on 6.30 where we're going to put a bylaw in place and then it says note that police and not council officers or parking wardens are responsible for this. Do we simply choose not to, or is it because the police are the only ones that can police this matter?
So through the chair, the Land Transport Act doesn't give council the powers to be able to enforce that. So only police have the power to enforce those types of things, albeit that it's a council bylaw.
My understanding of the Transport Act, if it's moving, it's police. If it's stationary, we can do it. Sorry, Councillor Bench.
I think that there's an ultimate right to walk and that everything is impeding into that, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And if you don't think there's an ultimate right for walkers, then why did we put in all the wheelchair ramps and all the stuff for the visually impaired? Because it doesn't matter if you go right around the world, every journey starts and ends with a walk. So the right of people to walk, I think, is being pushed by all these things that are happening. And I mean, I'm one of them. And so a wheeled recreational vehicle is different. Is that not a bicycle? Is it a mobility scooter? Where's that line?
So through the chair, there is a legal definition of wheeled recreational vehicles, but and it's quite a definition. But to try and simplify it just means a vehicle that is based on wheels that is predominantly used, but doesn't need to exclusively be used for recreational purposes. So it does take into account, as I said, because we're talking about footpaths here, it is those recreational vehicles that do have that wheel diameter that is less than the minimum requirement, so they are legally allowed to go on the footpath. And
so a bike, an adult-sized bike can go on the footpath or not?
No, it can't. Generally speaking, an adult-sized bike wheel diameter is beyond the limit of the wheel diameter that's allowed. children's cycles tend to be just underneath, deliberately just underneath.
Yeah, well, it is a bit of an anomaly, children, because they can't drive a car, but they're expected to ride on the road. And
but it also takes into account, as I talked about, a whole slew of new recreational devices, like not even e-scooters, but just scooters, because the wheel diameter is low. Skateboards we talked about, but then there's a range of new vehicle types coming in with the use of battery to assist them.
So mobility scooters can go on the footpath.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Minna. And just to clarify an earlier point, in 6.25, it states that bylaw prohibiting the use and so on will expire, but it will continue under the new bylaw under savings and transitional provisions. Is that correct? So these restrictions will continue.
Through the chair, you've got me again, Councillor Stallard. That is the intent that we carry those over.
It was just to
resolve otherwise.
Okay, and this one other thing, unless Councillor Rollo was going to speak to a concern of the guests we have around two sides versus one side of some street. Thanks. It's just the concerns raised by our guests that the CBD defined by those 4 streets, apparently the bylaw applies to only the inside of those streets and not the outside. And they were wanting, because they are busy streets, and they want it to apply to the outside as well as the inside. So how do we look at that? Is that for a later?
So through the chair, that would be for a later council resolution to adjust those limits.
So what we're doing is giving ourselves the power to make resolutions, and then when we make those resolutions, what our submitters have said is make sure you include those areas. And that's a very fair point, but it's not the issue for us today. What we're simply doing today through the bylaw is giving us the power to pass those resolutions to restrict these vehicles. All right. I think is there anybody who is opposed to the recommendations of officers to give us this future power to be able to pass resolutions to restrict these? That being the case, I'm going to accept that one proceeds. The next one, of which there are substantive submissions, is the question of parking for display or sale. And this is recommending that we proceed with clause 38, that effectively says you can't use parking on the side of the road for selling your vehicle or for some form of advertising. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I want to get clear, because mostly the cars that get parked on the side of the road are on weekends. So one, how is that going to be enforced and managed, and do we have an operational budget and cost applied for that? And two, you have people who live on those main busy roads that don't have off-street parking, and they may be selling their vehicle and would park the vehicle outside of their house, which would be longer than an hour. So how are they then going to be exempt from this penalty when they're actually just parking outside their house because they may be sleeping or maybe doing normal living activities inside? So how is this going to be managed?
So through the chair, it is a blanket rule around advertising your vehicle for sale on road reserve. So if it just happens to be parked outside your house, as you're parking overnight, they would be caught up in this if they had a sign in their window that says for sale.
Okay, and also too, it's got Wakakotahi support this. So are they then going to contribute to the ongoing compliance and enforcement cost and operational fees that would then, or operational budgets that actually become impacted on this, because the state highways and things like that are their responsibility, but we'll be doing the enforcement? Are they going to be contributing to the operational costs of enforcement?
So through the chair, enforcement of this would be similar to enforcement of a number of other things that we've talked about already, that it will be as someone has pointed it out and they will go and investigate, or whether they identify a vehicle that has a for sale sign on as part of their regular, driving around or other duties.
Okay, well, the example I'd use is Tahunanui Drive, which is state highway, and then we enforce and manage that through our costs. Wakakotahi going to provide monetary means to offset that?
Through the chair, no, that is not their intention to offset costs of.
So no wonder they're happy to support it.
In our dreams, good point, but I'm slightly pessimistic. Can I just ask a quick question? The under 38, it prohibits a candidate for election parking for display or sale. Can I just check? We're in the middle of a general election. Is it lawful at the moment? Is this a new rule? Sorry. Is this a new rule? So, and this parking bylaw is not going to come into effect until we adopt it. And there'll be some date of that. The key question I want to check is this a new rule or is that currently the situation? Effectively, what I'm seeing here is I see companies on the side of the road selling firewood, and they put the trailer firewood out and they put a sign advertising, see lots of cars parked, please buy me. Here's the phone number. I know what you're after and don't have a difficulty. My simple question is it currently the law that a political candidate cannot put a trailer on the road or is this new? I'm still quite happy with it. My view is the same rules should apply.
So through the chair, specifically with trailers, it comes back to that rule that we were talking about right at the start of the day, where if it's more than 7 days, if it's there for more than 7 days, it would be deemed to be a long-term parking and that would be against it.
Yep. But if they had a trailer signing advertising a particular candidate at the moment for 2 or 3 days, until they reach the 7 days, it is quite lawful. This changes it and makes it unlawful from day one. Have I got that correct?
The rule as it's drafted, it talks about for sale of the vehicle that's been not specifically advertising.
Yes. Right.
Oh, does it? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Skinner.
Oh, sorry.
Incidentally, when will this come into effect relative to the date of the general election that's scheduled for the 14th of October?
Through you,
making the assumption we adopt
today. Today's the date. Yeah,
comes into effect today. Thank you, Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. And I think Drew, you're reading 6.33, are you? Just Drew's raised that. So yeah, I'm reading it that. I see you're doing it for people which you can stage a car on the side of the road for sale, etc. But this is going to capture, say, for example, my car used to have Skinner photography, for example. You could come and tow that away, or if I put a sign up on my car selling those apricot trees because I can't find a firm to plant them, it'll be caught up in that as well. Is that right?
So I'm just confirming, I'm just rereading just to clarify it. So I think the important thing is here, parked on the side of the road for the purpose of is the important thing. So if it is a trailer or a vehicle that you're deliberately leaving on the side of the road to deliberately advertise.
Okay, so many cars that have got sign writing on it as part of their business or NILMAC.
There'll be a bit of a legal test where council staff have to apply.
You think that's, just if I can test this, on the road for the purpose of, does that make it clear that it can't be this?
So Skinner photography is on the side of the road and you're doing a photography job, fine.
Yeah.
But if the council staff believe that you've just put it on this busy road.
So my question is, on any road for this purpose, that's good enough terminology to make that clear. Enforcement, because I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, through the chair, it is going to be a challenge. And again, just like many of the other things that we've talked about, we'd like to use a proactive approach rather than an enforcement approach first off, which will start with the conversations. But if we feel like someone is deliberately using it as a way of advertising and it's been fairly clear, then we can use this to enforce it.
So my concern, and I see also utilising this rule for safety purposes, which I understand, but then it could be overly used when it's not clearly the case. So my concern is, probably from a public perspective, is like from day one when we dealt with this draft, I see we're trying to achieve, are we overreaching? Because it was all sorts of tools are great for a situation where there's a clear safety issue, and I think there's plenty of rules that cover that. But my concern is wardens or officers doing their job overly well, then can quite rightly use the rules to do that. And there's been times when rules have been enforced overly excitedly, and we've had to sort of say, pull back, no, just pull back a little bit, and there's been that bit of move. So my concern is public's concern is that could be seen as overreaching, unnecessary. So I just want some clarity, and that rule, when we're saying it's for that purpose, you're sort of saying that will be challenging.
So through the chair, look, you've quite rightly pointed out that that whether it's just happens to be there or whether it's actually been deliberately used as advertising is something that we're going to have to work our way through. Ultimately, it's up to the council to decide if this is a rule or whether we are overreaching. It's something from a safety point of view that you've pointed out, and that's why we're advertising it. We're recommending that it be included. Whether we've got that balance right or not, it will be up to this council to make that.
And do you think you've got? I know there are quite a few tools to cover that safety issue. Is there already a blank spot? Is there a concern that's prompted this rule?
So vehicles for sale specifically has always been a concern from a safety perspective.
We already have a rule.
Yeah, and because a vehicle parked on the side of the road, we haven't, going back to Rule 38, where we've decided that we're not going to include it is because they're long term. Then this is trying to pick that up, whether a vehicle is there and it's causing a distraction because people are slowing down or looking at it or trying to read a phone number as they go past.
Okay, I'll make my phone number bigger. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you for your help. Very good.
Again, Councillor Brand, then Councillor Sanson.
Thank you. I feel similar to where Councillor Skinner was going, so I'm just going to take a little bit more. Primary purpose is about vehicles for sale. I feel having that sentence in there, advertising a good or service, is going to create unnecessary fallout because there are many vehicles that have signage on their vehicles, business vehicles and everything else, promoting their businesses and services as they drive around and park and do their jobs that they go to tradesmen and everything like that. But I think it also then restricts the advertising that we can put on buses, and it will also restrict the advertising that other vehicles like the police travel ban uses to escort their clientele down to Christchurch after being heard in court, where they actually promote the services for anti-violence and family violence services and stuff like that. So I think you're opening a hornet's nest by concluding the advertising good and services on vehicles. And if that was removed, I feel that the rest of that would be fine. But I just feel having that on there, you're going to create a hornet's nest that we don't need, and it's going to gather in many tradespeople, even council itself with its advertising on its own vehicles, promoting Nelson City Council services, NELMAC promoting their services, the buses, when we've just talked about what advertising can be on the buses, and also NGOs that work with the police to promote services that will deter or give people help for to deter from bad behaviour.
Okay. Councillor Sanson.
And as through the chair, I think there's a valid concern. Yep. And yep.
Yeah.
We could potentially strike that out. Yep.
Councillor Sanson, you're fine.
Yep.
Look, I'm Councillor Stello.
Just quickly in response to what Trudy's saying, good point, but I think the wording is if the person parks the vehicle for the purpose of advertising. And I think a tradesman, they're parking there outside the house for the purpose of going in to have their dinner and so on. So I think there's enough.
I'm in the same space. My concern in this area is where do these people who want to advertise, including dodgy MPs that want to get themselves re-elected, of which I've been one, you put them in the busiest places. They are the places where actually they pose the greatest risk. There are lots of opportunities to advertise in newspapers, through social media and the like, and the use of our road and corridor should be for the purposes of people being able to get around, not as a form of advertising. And that is why I am supportive of the change in the recommendation. Councillor Bench.
I have a guy who lives down the road from me who makes his living cutting firewood and parks his trailer outside his house every day, because that's where he lives, and it says trailer load of firewood for sale, $150. I don't like laws that punish the little guy and force you to go to the big corporates instead. And so is his trailer, does that become illegal?
Yes.
It does.
Well, my view is that he is deliberately parking the firewood on a busy road to advertise the sale of the firewood. We should be upfront that we're saying, and your concern's quite valid, Councillor Benj. That's where we've got to weigh up different competing values. But I think the honest answer, Drew, is yes.
And when it comes to cars, the same thing. Cars parked on the side of the road for sale was very popular. And that's your problem. It's because if it hadn't been popular, it wouldn't have mattered. But, you get 10 and then you've got 30 and then you've got 100. You can't, obviously it was working for people, so they wanted to do it. And what you're doing is forcing them once again to go to the big corporates who have a problem, because if you've got a cheap car, they have to give it a guarantee. And the guarantee costs, they know they have to allow about $3,000 to $5,000 to fix that car if it breaks down within the first 3 months. And they don't want to do it. So you've got a car that's worth $3,000. They don't want to sell them, or even $5,000. So my question to you is, we have a plethora of markets around town, some trying to get started, some old. If one of them were to allow cars to be sold in their market, would you oppose that?
I think that's a difficult question for officers in the sense that we could ask them for a report on that, and I'm aware of that interest. I'm actually quite supportive. But I'm not sure, Councillor Benj, when we're dealing with a parking bylaw, asking a question that's not really a transport question. It's a question of, would we allow a specific market to operate on one of our car parks for selling cars? Legitimate question. I just don't think it's a legitimate question of Drew.
Okay, but the reason I say is because if you allowed it, you would suddenly have a big problem. Oh, well, I don't know what's the problem, but you would suddenly have lots of cars parked, and they like to pick the same spot because everyone can go there and look. So there's a need, and it's a way of supplying our citizens and satisfying that need. We could be part of the solution and then legitimately say, you cannot do this on the side of the road. It is out totally. But I think when there's clearly a need, we have some responsibility, if we are in the position, to satisfy that need.
Drew, do you have any comment or?
No comment. No. I think that's a discussion for another.
It's a discussion, but not relevant to the issue around the bylaw. So it's absolutely fair, Councillor Benj. It's just that for the bylaw discussion, it's a separate question. Councillor Paki.
Councillor Chair, I just wanted to make an observation. I think one of the submissions that I read, I can't remember where it was, but noted that in the more recent times, the evolution through the online formats has been the go-to for selling vehicles. I've sold probably 15 vehicles in the last maybe 7 years, and I haven't sold a single one of them by putting a sign on the side of the road. That's been the most unsuccessful for me. So I think that if that was the only avenue for people to sell cars, then I would definitely be concerned that we were stopping it. But I think on top of that, I don't have an issue if people want to put a sign in their car. It was only really, from my understanding, the lobby groups from the car sales industry that didn't want people parking their cars outside a car yard with a sign on it, because it was obviously the conflict that was happening there.
Yeah. Can I just get an indication from councillors? Are they supportive of the staff's recommendation to proceed with this advertising rule of not allowing effectively the road space to be used for advertising goods, sale of a vehicle, or promoting a candidate for election? People are supportive? Just get nods. Yeah.
Concern I have, it just takes, and following on from Matthew, it takes the colour. I mean, we're going to have a pretty bland, sterile sort of a city. If you take the entrepreneurial side of a little bit of marketing on the side occasionally, just behave yourself. I do think it just takes some of the character away from and it provides an opportunity for people to be people. And if you just throw so many rules at it, I mean, we're getting down to the nitty gritty now. We really and truly are, and sucking any, enthusiasm or fresh initiative out of people, so they can't do this and they can't do that. So it's the colour that concerns me. It's going to be a sterile type city if you just take this to the extreme. So I just want to get that off my chest.
Good on you. Look, with all of these questions, it's always that balance. Is the problem big enough to the point where you want to regulate, or are we overreaching? And there isn't any black and white. And Councillor Courtney's comments do sort of flesh out as to where's that reasonable. Can I just ask for an indication by just an informal show of hands, those that are supportive of proceeding with the prohibition on parking for the purposes of advertising goods and services, car sales and political advertising? Those that are supportive of proceeding? Just Aaron? Those that would prefer we just let it be? It looks like...
No, you're an outlier.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
I just see quite a level of inconsistency. So somebody can't park their own car outside their house with a little sign in it that says for sale, but it's okay for the next person to park their massive motorhome outside their home. And, that impairs safety, it impairs access for cyclists and little people, micromobility. So there just seems to me to be inconsistency. So I would support this if there was also support for the other. But if we're not supporting the motorhomes, I can't see why we would be supporting this. It just seems highly inconsistent.
I understand that, and that's justification where we've landed, but I'm sorry, the signal to officials is we're not proceeding with the parking for display and sale restrictions. Status quo. Councillor Benj, you've had a win. I now want to clock through the remaining. He was the one that feels that we were being a bit nanny staged against the firewood operator, and I sort of. Success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. What I'd like to do on the remaining recommendations is I'm going to take this approach. We're going to accept all. The reason I wanted to have debate on those is there were submissions and some debate. The remaining issues tend to be quite technical, and so what I'd now like to do is on all of the remaining issues is just allow a free-for-all on any, but I'd like you to identify which particular staff recommendation you would like to express a different view. And I'm only really, if I can be a little bit restrictive, looking for contributions where you want to change the staff recommendation on the remaining issues. That is the issues on page 11, 12, 13 and 14. So if you're happy with the recommendation, silent, and then each time you raise an issue, I'm going to try and resolve those. I'm assuming then that there are no further concerns on the paper with those minor other issues. I'm sorry, I've misread that. Councillor Brand first.
I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit confused about 6.41, about 6.42. Well, basically, right through to about 6.46 about Wakakotahi and state highways, because we have no control. So for them to say they want to be involved, aren't we the ones asking to be involved in their process, because their process is around the state highways and everything else? So haven't we got that back to front?
Staff, do you want to respond? I'm one of those that says the average punter does not see a distinction in parking rules between a state highway and the other. And as much as we can get consistency, I just think it works better for the community at large. But Drew, I don't know where your perspective is with respect to Councillor Brand's question.
So through the chair, the reason why staff have put this up, or officers have put this up, is I think the Mayor mostly covered it, is that we're trying to get some consistency. If parking, by and large, a number of parking or on the side of the road parking is to either support or support a commercial businesses, or to restrict it to allow for some other function to happen. We have state highways that run through our area, and the state highways, Waka Kotahi doesn't tend to do a lot of enforcement. In fact, I'm not aware of any enforcement that they've done on the state highways through Nelson. I might be wrong in that, but and so this is putting some sort of consistency across it, that we're just treating the parking that's on a state highway through our district or our city as the same as a local road in state that isn't a state highway, that's a local road. So so it just provides that consistency. It means that someone isn't getting away with not observing the parking restrictions on the state highway because they're more lenient compared to if it's on. So we've got different roads that actually have different enforcement regimes. So we're trying to make it consistent, and by council taking on that responsibility, it brings that consistency into it.
Okay, that just raises some of the issues that were raised at that North Nelson meeting with like Haida School and also the other bit where there's parking for people to get in and out. So how does this work in with that? Because it's limited parking, it's on a state highway, they don't enforce it, but it's health and safety issues, and there's also speed management and stuff that comes involved in that. And there was quite a bit of discussion that came up on that Monday night around the bend from, what's that other school? Clifton Terrace round through to Haida. So how does that get enforced or become involved in this conversation?
I think they're good points, Councillor Brand, but I think the bottom line is this. Waka Kotahi will always insist that at the end of the day they make the rules on the state highway, and I don't think you'll shift on that. What we're saying here is regardless of who makes the rules, we want to have consistent enforcement over those that are local roads and those that are state highways. And we will always have the frustration at the end of the day, Waka Kotahi will make the rules on what's on the state highway.
Agree totally. Yep. Well summarised. Yep.
So it's not particularly satisfactory, Councillor Brand, but I think it is unavoidable. Councillor Rollo.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. And just on the state highway issue, so in Te Hunanui there, we've got a community of businesses, one of which is a medical centre that has last to my knowledge, it had a parking 90-minute limit on it. Are we all of a sudden, do we have the right, if we move forward with this, to go and change those signs to make them longer, shorter? And are we going to all of a sudden actively start policing those areas? Or are we simply saying, right, on the state highways, if there's some issues, we'll go and assess them? Or are we just going to start policing? I hope that makes sense.
I think through the chair, once again, if there's something that's been raised, we will investigate, because what this is actually saying is that we will be monitoring those areas. So if those, just like everything else that we've been saying in terms of the consistent messaging, if something has been raised, then we will investigate it. I doubt very, very much we'll be driving state highways and or our other roads to look for offences. We just don't have. I just don't think that that's the way we do business, and we just don't have the personnel for that either. In terms of any changes, that is a state highway, and we'd have to work with Waka Kotahi to look at that. But there's certainly there's no ability for us just to go and change things. We have to work with the community, we have to work with businesses, and we have to work with Waka Kotahi.
Okay. Councillor Bench. I'm now taking, like I say, questions or concerns about any of the last batch.
40.
Yep, 640.
Main road. We just put all upon. I don't think we should get involved at all. And if there's an issue, let's bring the one. Sort it out. 40, repairs of vehicles on the side of the road. Repairs a vehicle on the side of the road. As someone has said, it just unnecessarily punishes poor people, and I don't see why you can't repair your vehicle on the side of the road. It also adds to the colour of our community. Engine braking. If any of you have driven a big truck, an engine brake is a safety device on a truck, and it's there for a damn good reason. And if you do something stupid in front of a truck and it needs to stop, you'll be very pleased if it had an engine brake and it was switched on. And I like the sign that says avoid using your engine brake. Not you can't use your engine brake, because you can, if you've used a truck, you can switch it on and off whenever you like. And you can mitigate it coming on with your accelerator and brake. And I think the word avoid is what should be there, it shouldn't be banned. 658, traffic calming devices. I hate these things. And we've just got them everywhere. And it really is a lazy way of trying to enforce the rules. And this is the rules about young boys with buttons in their lips cruising. And they usually do it at night. And if you just sit on a high spot, you can watch them and someone can just go and stop them. Traffic calming devices affect everything. And some of them now are so complicated that there is a plethora of stripes, raised bits, bars, refuges, and they're all painted different colours. And it's just a mass of things. I think they're becoming in danger of being a hazard themselves. The one other thing was, it says in here somewhere to the bottom about access to a property via an unformed road. Does that mean driving over the curb? Is that a bit like the lawn? Does that mean you can or can't drive over a curb? Because there's a lot of houses that do access their property, they don't have a driveway, they just drive over the curb into their garage, and they usually put a log or a piece of steel there or something. Is that what this is referring to? Is it a fancy way of saying driving over the curb, or is it something else?
So through the chair, this came from a submission that they opposed the proposal to ban parking on unformed roads. So we're talking about paper roads here, or ones that don't have a formed carriageway. They are...
Okay, that's nothing to do with crossing the curb.
No, there was another submission that was talking about accessway and crossing the curb and the maintenance of that. But no, that one's specifically not that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Arolo.
I just want to signal that I'm not in favour of us getting involved with the state highways. They belong to Waka Kotahi, and if they can't police them, I don't think it's our responsibility, so I don't support that.
The only, and look, I understand, and I've been on the other side of the fence as a representative of central government. My concern is that if we adopt that approach, who do we expect to do the enforcement of parking on state highways? Take State Highway 6 through to Hunanui. If we say we're not going to do it, then my view is that I don't see Whakakatahi do not have enforcement staff in the community. The police aren't going to make it a priority. And I actually think we do the community a disservice in being not pragmatic. And my view is, do I expect Whakakatahi to employ parking enforcement staff for the few streets that they have that are state highway? No, I don't. And that's where I'm a pragmatist. So the question I'd have for you, Councillor Rollo, is if the council's not going to enforce the parking rules on state highways, who is? Is it reasonable to expect Whakakatahi to employ staff to do so, or is it more likely that it won't happen, and will the community be better by that? And that's my concern.
I just think we're opening a can of worms where all of a sudden we're going to be policing areas that haven't been policed before. And it opens up a can of worms, because if there's road maintenance issues on those state highways, all of a sudden the appetite from the community is, well, council are enforcing it, so we'll have to then go and do the maintenance. And I just think it's a bigger picture and concern that it is. And I think we should leave it to Waka Kotahi.
So I think that there's been a couple of guys that have expressed concern about clause 5.1 in the bylaw. And so I just want to be fair and say, is there general people that support that perspective, that you want 5.1 changed, or are you comfortable with 5.1, where effectively the council does take an enforcement role on those state highways? Just get a quick show of hand. Who's comfortable with 5.1 as it is? Who would prefer 5.1 was changed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it's very close. Can I just, I'm going to have to do that again. Those that would prefer 5.1 was removed and made no reference to the state highways, please put your hand up. So I have a direct count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is a majority. And so, sorry? Apologies. Well, I'm just trying to, rather than go.
It is a majority, but it's not a vote.
Councillor Sanson?
I just wanted to seek clarification, if it's possible, on this point from the officers.
Sure.
So I recall in an earlier time, and maybe it was just a workshop, that there had been quite a long discussion with elected members over why council having responsibility for enforcement on the state highways was beneficial for the community and for council. But I'm assuming that is just what informed this bylaw. So we haven't taken any prior discussion or reached any prior position on that. Is that correct?
So through the chair, there's no position arrived on it. This is exactly why we went out and consulted on the issue.
Yeah.
Ultimately, council can either agree to include or not. I think the reasons are, as you've summarised, I think there's consistency. We're working with Waka Kotahi. It's not onerous in this particular case. I don't think we're going to be stepping on any duties that Waka Kotahi has. In actual fact, I can definitely say we're not going to be affecting maintenance other issues, but I think it's the consistency thing. But we went out, and that's the council's decision to include.
So can I just put a direct question? I don't want to undo what we've decided, but is there any practical view that Drew or Alec have that, having landed on a preferred position of removing reference to the state highways in the bylaw, that creates any real practical problem for officers? It was a preferred position, but is it going to create any huge problems for you guys?
Both of us, no.
No. So it was one of those, the bit where I've got some sympathy with Campbell's position on this is that in one bit, 5.1b, we say this bylaw applies to the state highways. And then in 5.2, we say, but we can't really use our enforcement powers. And so that's why I'm in a reasonably balanced position and I'm happy where we've landed. And so can I be clear for officers? We're going to remove 5.1b and 5.2, and we'll simply say this bylaw applies to all roads under the care, control and management of the councils. Okay. Are there any other issues that councillors wish to raise in those last few sections? Councillor Stello.
Just briefly, in 0.6.40, what powers are delegated to council from Waka Kotahi? What are those powers? What does that refer to? Are we responsible for those roads? Are we responsible for parking and so on?
So through the chair, it was really only the powers to enforce the current parking restrictions. That was it. It wasn't any additional powers other than just to enforce it through a normal enforcement.
So basically, by excluding clause 5.1, we're saying there's no enforcement of parking on those roads.
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is this bylaw does not apply to the state highways, but my understanding is that the rules that state highways put in control on those areas do. Have I got that correct?
Correct. So underneath this, if this is not included, we won't, as a Nelson City Council, under this bylaw, enforce anything on state highway for Waka Kotahi that passes through Nelson.
But can I just be clear? I'm in Te Hunanui. I'm on State Highway 6. There's a restriction in front of the parking of State Highway 6 in front of those stores. Council will continue to enforce that speed limit, that parking limit in that area. But the general provisions will pass in the bylaw still apply. Can you be clear?
No, sorry, through the chair, that's not correct. If there is parking enforcement, if you remove these clauses 5.1 and 5.2, then council cannot enforce the parking restrictions.
Oh,
and will not enforce. Cannot and will not.
so I do just want to ask those councillors that have given just an indicator vote that I thought we could still enforce, and it was just the other provisions of the bylaw. If we remove 5.1b and 5.2, that means effectively there is no enforcement on parking restrictions on state highways within Nelson City. That does cause me concern. I indicated that I did not want to do it. I'm going to, on that issue, I think it just feels wrong to me to have a sign up in a place like Te Hunanui that puts a parking restriction when effectively we are quite openly saying, and nobody's going to enforce it. And I think that is unworkable. So I am going to put that issue at the end to a formal vote. Yes, Councillor Paki.
Mr. Mayor, I've just got I'm signed kind of on that fence there, and I'm wavering between. So can I just ask a question of the officers?
Yeah.
There's a lot of businesses in that Te Hunanui stretch there, and a lot of their businesses rely on the accessibility and the parking that's along there. If we don't have any enforcement mechanism, how does that mean that we can't act on their behalf? You know, if they come to us with an issue and say, hey, you know, my business really, like maybe there's a night and day store along there. They say, you know, we need that onflow of traffic. We want you to help us out with that. We can't do anything if we don't have this as part of the bylaw.
So through the chair, that is indeed correct. Nelson City Council can't do anything. They can then go to Waka Kotahi and request that they enforce it, and whether they do or not is completely up to Waka Kotahi.
Okay.
And
So
in addition to that, any changes that any business require on State Highway 6 would need to be discussed with Waka Kotahi as the owner of State Highway 6.
So I guess the following question for that would be, if I may, through the chair, have we had issues with the businesses, you know, coming to? Is there any submissions or complaints that the businesses have made to council to say, hey, look, you know, we are having issues along there? Are we fighting a beast that doesn't exist, or is it? Are we just being cautious to allow a mechanism for us to be able to advocate, or rather to help out those businesses if problems should arise?
So through the chair, I'm just unaware if we've had many responses from the business owners about not being able to enforce. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but it was really around consistency and making sure that, say, Te Hunanui Drive has a similar level of enforcement to Muritai Street, which is just adjacent to it, and so there wasn't a disparity between people parking in one location because they can get away with more than another.
Okay.
I'm really just concerned about our ratepayers and the businesses along there. When they come to us, we just basically say to them, you're on your own. Is that right?
It's in essence, if you do not approve this, then we don't have the ability to enforce those, yes.
So I'm going to come back to that issue when I put the formal resolutions. Councillor Benge.
Part of that reply, did I hear you infer that if you go ahead with this, what you want, that you also gives you the right to decide on who the parking times and all that sort of thing? Did I pick that up or not?
What I said was that any changes to anything on State Highway 6 would need to follow the correct procedure involving council, Waka Kotahi and the businesses, just like we would normally do anywhere else in the city.
But
we
if we
wouldn't have
take
carte
on,
blanche to change anything on State Highway 6, no.
but if we take on the policing of it, does that give us rights to have a bigger say or a say on our own about parking times or limited?
No, I think what policing and in terms, so Waka Kotahi will ultimately lead in terms of whether something should be P90, P30 or no parking. The enforcement thereof will be council. We will be a party in terms of the discussion because State Highway 6 runs through the city, but ultimately that'll be Waka Kotahi's decision. We will enforce it. So NCC cannot unilaterally make any decisions on State Highway 6 and then enforce them, no.
So it doesn't help us. It's only that we're enforcing it, and it may be at our cost. Is that right?
Oh, it will be at our cost, yes.
So we won't make any money out of it?
No.
Okay, Thank you.
Okay, so here's how I've got one. Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry. This goes back to a previous clause, but I do think it's in council's interest to just clarify a couple of points. So it's regarding the wheeled recreational devices. I noted that earlier you mentioned the new bylaw will revoke the existing bylaw. Just clause 47.2 does say that the schedules still apply, so the existing restrictions in the CBD will still apply until those are changed. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And the other thing that I wanted to clarify is that the old bylaw says no person shall, and then it lists skateboards, roller skates, inline skates, and wheeled recreational devices. The new one only says wheeled recreational devices, which means we won't be able to limit, by the NZTA definition, normal skateboards and scooters, which I'm quite happy with, but I wonder if we would like to have those powers within the bylaw, if I'm understanding this correctly. I also just have a third point. I think that clause 48.1 has a typo where it says clause 48, but it's referring to clause 47. We can go back through those one by one.
Drew, do you want to cover firstly the question and then the topo error that James has raised, Councillor Hodgson's raised?
So I was sorry, through the chair. I was trying to find out what you were referring to,
right.
And I lost track of your questions.
Sure.
So you need to point me to somewhere. I don't know where you're referring
yes,
to.
No, that's okay. So the first one was just around the schedules, and just to clarify my understanding that the previous schedules around the restrictions on recreational devices will still apply. When this comes through, we won't have to make new resolutions to put those back into force again. So that was just a clarification.
Sorry,
Stop there then and answer that one. And then
yes, that's a good way.
So through the chair, yes, I indeed misspoke earlier on. Councillor Stallard corrected me, and that the Schedule 2 of the current bylaw, we want to transition through to the new bylaw. So we wouldn't have to make brand new resolutions to retain those restrictions. So that's your first question.
So the second one was that the NZTA definition of wheeled recreational devices excludes non-powered devices with wheels under that big. My understanding is we would still want to potentially restrict non-powered devices, as we currently do with the existing schedules, with wheels smaller than that are personally propelled. That was kind of the view that I was picking up from around the table. And so I just wonder if we're going to be limited with what we can specify by the way the new bylaw is written.
So through the chair, it was indeed the intent to restrict non-powered vehicles. In fact, it does at the moment, the current bylaw.
Yeah.
So if there is a gap in there with the definition, then we'd look to close that to include non-powered vehicles.
Sure. And then the third one was just that clause 48.1. I can see how it happened because I think a clause was removed, and so then they would have all had to be amended. It says the resolutions of council made or continued under the bylaw revoked under clause 48, but I think it's referring to clause 47. That's just a small
typo.
Yeah.
Okay, I still don't know where you're referring to. Sorry, it's been is it on the attachment? Is it in the body of the report? Sorry, Councillor.
It's in the body, but I can email it through. I just wasn't sure if I needed to raise it before we.
Sorry, I can't follow.
I want to now bring this to a conclusion, and here's how I'm going to handle it. We have the recommendations before us. Under recommendation 2, I want to deal with the substantive amendments, so I'm quite explicit about what we've decided today. There are a number of minor issues, like the last one that's just been raised by Councillor Hodgson and a couple from Councillor Stallard, which was just about getting the wording right. And I think it's proper to leave those to the Chief Executive. So the wording that I'd like to add to, I've got one substantive issue that I just would like to test with colleagues. I am not comfortable with us passing a bylaw today and it instantly taking effect. I also think that through our Nelson communication, before you enforce the rules, even though I know that our staff won't, it's just not good practice. I would like us to specify that this new bylaw comes into effect on a reasonable date for us to get a new version of our Nelson out so people know what the change of rules are. And my suggestion is the 1st of October. Officers comfortable with that and the councillors familiar with. Rather than saying this applies as of now, there's a few wording tidy ups that have to be done by our staff, and it gives you the opportunity to communicate it. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. So just to query that, are we, as it stands, we are adopting the restriction around advertising for electoral?
No, we're not.
No, we're not.
So it makes no difference to the electoral advertising issue. And I understand that's a sensitive issue at this time, but it makes no difference because we're not going to make any change here.
Thanks.
Councillor Rainey, this is the specific question. Are people happy with my proposition that there be a specified date when it comes into effect?
Well, my only concern with that would be that so you're saying that that wouldn't come into action until October the 1st. Is that what
it's just a suggested date. And the reason I chose October the 1st is our Nelson has just come out for August. It gives the opportunity in our Nelson in September to say, hey guys, these are the new rules, and gives people a chance to adapt by 1st of October.
My real concern would be that then the public at large would potentially consider that was a period of time in which they could complain about the new bylaw that was going to come in on that date and inundate staff with queries about it. I mean, it's essentially, I know it's not opening it up to consultation again, but indeed it's putting it out into the public that these changes are coming.
My view as a legislator and a bylaw maker is that even though I know council staff aren't going to run out there tomorrow and say, I've got this new bylaw, I'm going to ping you, I just think it's good practice to give people notice. But there is an alternative point of view, and that is, Pete, that you'd be quite happy for it just to come in tomorrow.
I'd be much happier for it just coming tomorrow. Then there's no question. Otherwise, I think there's a potential for staff to be inundated by questions about the new bylaw before it actually comes into play.
Through the chair, I think I don't think we have a major objection for it to come into force on the 1st of October. Equally, it could also come into force on the day the other one lapses in November, and then it's just a smooth transition from one to the other. So we would be okay with it.
What date technically does?
I knew you were going to ask me that, but I think it's sometime in November. I just don't know what date that is. I don't think I would be overly concerned about the questions coming in. I think we just need to get some good comms out, and I think it does give us time to actually get it out into the community.
It's just a few checking of wording and those sorts of things that I'd be more comfortable with. But look, it's a very simple issue. Can I just have a simple indication of hands? Those that would prefer, I'm going to give two choices. Those that prefer as it comes into effect immediately, those that would prefer it come into effect on a specified date, of which my suggestion is 1st of October. Those that would prefer immediately, those that would prefer a specified date, 1st of October. 1st of October, it shall be. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it as I understand the preferred position of council. And so approves rather than the word any amendments. Could you just go up onto the screen for me, please? And say this, remove the word any. And approve amendment of, and the first one is that clause 37 be restricted to urban areas. That clause 38, this is the sale one, be removed. That clause 39, that's the one with respect, sorry. That clause 39 be removed. That is the one with respect to the first discussion, with respect to the issue of long-term parking of motorhomes. And that the bylaw take effect on the 1st of October.
Through the chair, I can just tell you the old bylaw expires on the 3rd of November. So we could just make 3rd of November the date if you want.
I think I've got a preference for the officers of going 3rd November. The world ain't going to come to an end on those few days. Just gives a few more lives. So just when it expires, it takes effect. Let's just say the bylaw takes effect on 3rd November? From 3rd November? Yep. And then what I wish to do is, you'll know I have deliberately not included the amendment with respect to the exclusion of state highway in clause 4. But I want to give the opportunity, Campbell, and if you would like to move that amendment be added, I will not be supporting it. But I want to give, we had an informal show of hands, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to move that resolution to also include an exclusion of reference to state highway in clause 5 if you wish to pursue that issue.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I'd like to, I'm receiving a motion moved by Campbell Rollo that recommendation 2 be amended. Could you just put in brackets for me? This is the amendment after the words that clause 39 be removed. I actually put it right at the beginning.
Sorry,
Approves an amendment to clause 37.
sorry, Mina, we just have a bit of perhaps misunderstanding, and this is something that I would need Mr. Lavertis's advice on. Is our understanding from a governance perspective is that clause 39 is not currently in the attachment. So if we delete clause 39, what we're actually deleting is your 39 that's in your attachment to the report.
So, so we already, it's
So
fine.
so what I'd like to do, sorry about this, guys, is just enables us to get the resolutions tidy. I'm going to take a 5-minute adjournment because we have that time. Then what I'm going to do is to bring back a resolution that wraps up what I think we've informally decided. I'm going to allow formal debate on the question of whether the state highways is included or not as a separate amendment, because I'm not supporting it. I'm going to move these other amendments that we've agreed to, and then to resolve it that way. So we're going to be adjourned until 12:10 just to enable these resolutions to be drafted up so we're absolutely clear where we're landing. Council's adjourned. Thank you. chair resolutions 1, 2, 4, and 5, not resolution 3. Resolution 3 deals with the issue of Whakakatahi and the state highways. Can I have a seconder for resolutions 1, 2, 4, and 5? They are the bits. Yeah, sure. So if I can just take you through, 1 is simply accepting the report. 2 is making all the 3 changes. Now, I'm sorry, this is a little bit confusing. The first piece is that the extra words on the urban area, which is on the burn parking, the removal of 38 is around the issue of the firewood and the advertisement for sale. The reason we don't need to remove 39 is because that was not in it, because it was in the staff recommendations that it comes out. That was the issue of the camper vans, right? And then the last resolution is just changing the date. The reason I have deliberately put resolution 3 separately is I'm going to ask Councillor Campbell to rule that separately and have a separate debate on that. Councillor Sanson, this is just about getting clarity of what we're going to debate.
Yeah, is it possible for somebody to clarify why we specify removal of clause 38 but not removal of clause 39?
Because 39 was not there because the staff recommendation took it out. With respect to the removal of clause 39, it's not in there because the staff weren't recommending it there. So that's where there's a little bit of confusion.
It's all good. I just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
It would be a double negative if we, yeah.
Okay, so these are effectively the only variations from the staff recs that are covered in the resolution. I'm now seeking a seconder to resolutions 1, 2, 4, 5. Clarification?
I think that because we're voting on today's recommendation, not on the draft bylaw that we found.
Yep.
You can have used the draft bylaw that David wants to what from the public. Through the chair, so number 2 we're voting on, which is 2 issues in. I would appreciate if you had those as separate. So
I'm going to put at the end when I put them to the vote each of the resolutions separately.
Sorry, so you got 1 support, number 2, there's 2 different clauses. You got the 37 clause and the 38 clause. There may be those who have a different view on either, not the same.
I understand that, but I thought we'd got to a reasonable position on those, and there were not those that want to differentiate.
No, we with due respect.
No, all due respect, no, we hadn't. Which was great to give you as a chair direction of where we were at. But we come to this table with an open mind and a chance to listen to everybody's debate at the table, and those decisions are made then. We gave an indication where we were at, and some sort of changed and formalised through the good questioning of this.
So how could I look on
debate? There was a bit of debate from the chair and some of the table, but no, it's great to give an indication so you put energies in the right place, but no, they should be.
You wish the 2 parts of 2 to be put separately?
Correct. Thank you.
I think I can. Why don't it would make it easier for me to carry the votes if you just put an A in front of the first one and a B in front of the other, so that I can have the separate votes that Councillor.
Doing it separate, because what the danger happens, Chair, is that I or someone might support one of those and that
not the other,
then you don't support either.
Right. So I'm happy
and vice
to.
versa. So
I'm going to put 2A and 2B as a separate vote.
And for correct process and freedom of decision making, those hands up were a good direction for you, but they're not a decision making at the time. They were not a vote. This is a vote, and I should be still open to if another councillor says, well, I've got a good reason to go something else to go, actually, he makes a good point, I'll change my position. Okay. So no one should be firm at this stage. Okay. Now that we've now had a chance to question the staff and possibly with what they're at the table. Thank you.
So I'm just going to add, please ask officers to put a in front of 2A and a B in front of removal of clause 38 to enable me to put those 2 votes separately. And I'm now seeking a resolution, a seconder to my resolution for the adoption of 1, 2A, 2B, 4, 5 and 6. Thank you, Councillor Rainey. That's been moved and seconded. I'd now like to take a mover from Councillor Rollo for resolution 3. And is there a seconder for Councillor Rollo's motion? Councillor Bench. It is my intention to now debate resolution 3. The reason I think it's easier that the other ones sum it up is to have the debate on resolution 3 first. And I'll give the mover, Councillor Rollo, the opportunity to speak to resolution 3.
I'll just let the officers move away and then I'll debate. I think we're currently moving to allow us to police the state highways is a silly idea. We don't currently do it, and us getting involved is us telling the community and giving a good signal that actually we're going to start controlling more of this area, and it will open a can of worms. I think there's been enough consultation done, and the conversations I've had with people and businesses that are affected by this area is actually if we don't need to do it because they're not going to be affected, and so I'm quite happy to have that removed.
Would Councillor Benj like to speak to his seconding of resolution 3?
I just think we shouldn't get involved in being the police for the government, especially if it costs us money. I know that you want it to be consistent, and there is some merit in that. But I just don't think we should be someone else's police, especially when there's a cost to us.
Are there any persons who would like to speak to resolution 3? Councillor Stallard.
Thanks, Minnick. Yeah, I think it might be good for us to consider what the community might want, and we don't know for sure. But I think that I don't believe they would want to have this stark gap in our parking enforcement. Surely the businesses along that state highway into Hunanui, if someone was to park in the car park outside their shop all day, and if they were to phone council, and we would say actually there's really no effective monitoring or enforcement of any rules along that state highway, they might ask us some difficult questions about why we chose not to give that service to the community. So certainly I would support us having the ability. Admittedly, there's some extra cost, but I think the benefits to the community of having that consistency of enforcement are worth it.
Thanks, Councillor Stallard. Councillor Brand.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I was in two minds about this, but having spoken with those businesses along to Hunanui Drive from one end to the other and gathered their feedback, they have some anxiety around waka kotahi, and if this would then become a further issue and the step towards removing all parking, which would then limit accessibility to their businesses by the community. So therefore, I will support number 3 being there to ensure that those businesses understand that we want to ensure that their customers do have access to their business on top of the other process that is happening around the state highway.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. Are there any other comments? I would comment as Mayor that inevitably you get into these tensions between central and local government, and it is my view that you need to be very pragmatic. We use the police and can use the police funded by central government to enforce our bylaws. They have that authority. The quid pro quo should equally apply, and that sometimes our officers are used for enforcement of such things as parking bylaws. I worry that if the amendment is adopted, we're effectively saying we're quite happy that there is going to be nobody enforcing the bylaws for parking on state highways, and I don't think that is practical, nor do I actually realistically think it's practical for us to say to Waka Kotahi that they should separately employ staff for enforcing parking in what is such a very small area of the city that would be unjustifiable. So I'm the pragmatist. We can raise concerns with Waka Kotahi if they make unreasonable rules, but I don't think the rules of parking on State Highway 6 are unreasonable, and that it is just the pragmatic approach of our officers being able to enforce those in that area. Any other comments? I'd like to give the mover of the amendment resolution, and I just apologise, The staff have to take on board Councillor Skinner's view, just separated out those resolutions. So in fact, the resolution's changed in number, but is the same and is now resolution 4. So Councillor Rollo, you have your right of reply on resolution 4. Yes.
It's 2023 and we're yet to police that area. I don't think there's a great call of concern that we should start doing that. And I think if it sends a signal to Waka Kotahi on what they should do is actually maybe they should, when they've got time, to go and talk to those communities and see how they can actually help them for the better good.
I'm going to put resolution 4. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. No. I'm going to say that resolution 4 is lost, but any member is entitled to call for a formal vote.
I'd like to call a formal vote.
I'll ask the Chief Executives to conduct a vote on resolution 4.
I'll just have a clarification that
Yep.
Councillor Bench seconded that.
Yes, he did.
Yep.
Asking you to carry out a formal vote.
Okay, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Bench. For or against?
Councillor Anderson, I understood, was against. Correct.
Sorry, I'm not sure what.
To be absolutely clear, we are voting on resolution 4 that has been moved by Councillor Rollo and seconded by Councillor Benj. Its effect is to remove 5(1)(b) from the bylaw. And the practical effect of it is that the bylaw only applies to council roads and does not apply to Whakakatahi roads.
Yeah.
Councillor Benj, sorry.
So was that aye? Yes. Councillor Brown.
Aye.
Councillor Courtney.
Aye.
Councillor Hodgson.
No.
Deputy Mayor is not here. Councillor Paki.
Aye.
Councillor Rainey.
No.
Councillor Rollo.
Aye.
Councillor Sanson.
No.
Councillor Skinner.
Aye.
Councillor Stallard.
No.
Mayor Smith.
No.
6 no. 6 6 peace. So it's an absentee. We've got an absentee.
Can somebody advise me from the standing orders when an amendment is 6-all? We made a decision at our last council meeting that the chair would not have a casting vote.
It's lost.
So my advice from standing orders is 6-all, the amendment is lost. The remaining resolutions have been moved and seconded by Councillor Rainey and are now open for debate.
Number 2.
And it is my intention to put those resolutions separately as requested by Councillor Skinner.
So just a clarification, you just up number 2, is that right?
No, I'm now considering a debate on all of the resolutions that have been moved and seconded by myself and Councillor Rainey, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 and 7. And it is my intention to put them separately. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Minik. So I am speaking in support of this. I'm not totally happy with where it's landed, but I'm broadly supportive, and I just really want to acknowledge the staff for their work and their tolerance and patience while we, worked through all of this. And I think overall it will be beneficial broadly for the community and also for what we're trying to do with parking and traffic control. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Sanson. Any other Councillor Skinner?
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2 there in regards to the 37 clause in an urban area, which is in regards to berms. I can't support what you've got up on the screen there. I can't support us removing parking across berms, either be urban or in rural. the berms have been a great asset, and I think they're used well and self-policed pretty much in their tools already when there is an issue of safety or flagrant use of using those spots inappropriately. But we're pushing for a housing intensification, we seem. We've got more people living in our urban areas. You'll be well aware of many a street, which now just in the last 3 years has become more difficult as people are not having parking on their properties. And part of our push seems to be to not rely on developers to provide off-street parking. And as families are getting bigger or more people in the same household to cover their costs, etc., more and more cars aren't able to park on their own properties. They're making use of the side streets. And the berms, when there's a situation on a narrow street, people make use of those berms respectfully and park a couple of wheels on those grass berms to make sure there's enough room for emergency vehicles, as the officers pointed out, and traffic flow. So what we're doing here is, one sense, we're saying, hey, we want more people living in our urban streets, where with the increasing of rates and costs of living, more family members are having to live in the same household. They each have to have a vehicle to get to work, etc. And then we are not enabling a place for them to park. And our streets aren't able to cope with all the parking spots, and the berms are great, used properly. Also, as you know, when you've got an event or function or a birthday party and you've got parents with their kids coming around and you haven't got enough car parks outside your place, parking respectfully on a berm without blocking the footpath, we've got rules for footpaths, but without blocking a footpath, parking on a berm has been a great asset. My concern is here we're removing that and we're making it a no-win situation for the community. A, it's clogging up the roads with people parking fully on the road. B, I know there's a couple of roads around my area, just in the last 3 years, there's no way you get a fire truck through because they haven't got a berm to park in their situation. In roads, I know they've got a berm, people park a little bit on the edge there, and if you've got a fire truck or so forth, or vehicles coming two-way, you can safely do it. So I see we've been flipping the current rules, and the public, from my perspective, have made it very clear that the berms are a great asset. A lot of people enjoy mowing them and looking after them, and people respect that they've got plants or flowers in them. But when there's a bit of a grass area or a gravelled area on the side of a road, it's a great spot to temporarily park a vehicle in need. So just making it a bit more complicated than just an urban area, I think that's even making it more unappealing. The next position, if you focus on all these sorts of things, the next one, which is clause number 3, removal of clause 38. What was that? That was the, remind me, what was it, 38 there? I've got that. That was removal of parking and sales. I support where we are on that, and all the others I support, and I'm glad that I see we've decided, and the staff quite rightly have decided to remove that prohibition of camper vans parking on streets. Once again, the community, Joe Blogs, young families, pensioners especially, love to have a little camper van, love to go on a holiday after a long week or take the grandkids, and people are pretty respectful where they put their camper van, etc., on the side of a road. And I think it's part of the Kiwi culture. So I commend the staff, A, testing it, seeing if there's an issue, and B, responding to the public feedback. And also thank you for the public for feeding back on this, because I had a lot of people call me about that and berms, which is why I'm voting away on berms and other topics, and obviously struck a good and positive nerve to people, and they've made it very clear, and that's what consultation is about, not necessarily our own ideas at the table, but being engaged with the community. And so the only one I can't support here is that berm. Should enable people to use the berms respectfully. Once again, there's plenty of tools in the toolbox when it becomes an issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Skinner. Unless there's Councillor Pakipaki.
Yeah, good of there. So I'm really struggling with this one here because there's a couple of different things that come into play. Essentially, if people are going to be allowed to unrestricted park on the berms, that actually means that the property that's outside my place that I care for, that I mow and have actually invested a lot of money into getting it looking nice, anyone from the general public and anyone from my neighbours can park on that. There's no restriction. stopping them from parking on the lawn and the area that I take care of. My next door neighbour's actually got a garden in hers as well, where she's got some lovely flowers, and the one on the other side's actually got some veggie gardens parked there in their berm. Now, they take really good care of it. So essentially, it means that there's no way that we can stop people, anybody, members of the public, from parking there. But the other side of this coin is that I take care of my berm, and sometimes I park my car on that berm too. So, then I'm going to be in a position where I can't actually utilise it for my own vehicles out the front. So where is the middle ground? Where is the mechanism to allow us to be able to, so that's my concern. I just wanted to voice where I'm at, where it's mixed, and is it only through my complaints or, saying, oh, these people are parking on, I don't think my neighbours are going to complain about me parking on the front lawn, but it actually technically means that I can't do that either.
Okay, that being the case, that concludes. I'm not going to exercise my right of reply and that we go to voting. I'm going to put each of the resolutions separately, as I committed to Councillor Skinner. Those in favour of resolution 1, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, say no. Aye. That's the receiving of the report.
The report.
Oh, sorry.
All right. So I'm going to declare resolution 1 carried. Resolution number 2, I will put that to the vote. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no.
No. I have a division. Please ask for a division.
And a division is called for.
A division on item 2, Councillor Paki.
Aye.
Councillor Rollo.
Aye.
Councillor Anderson.
Aye.
Councillor Sanson.
Aye.
Councillor Stallard.
Aye.
Councillor Hodgson.
Aye.
Councillor Rainey. Councillor Skinner.
No.
Councillor Brand.
No.
Councillor Courtney.
Aye.
Councillor Benge. Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Carried. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 2.
Thank you.
Sorry if correction there. Just correct. Three no's.
3 no's. I'm sorry.
I thought I heard Councillor Skinner, Councillor Benge, and Councillor Brand. What did you have Brand down as?
No.
Councillor Benge is in the wrong column.
Sorry, apologies.
It's 9-3 is the correct vote. We'll get good at this. So that I declare resolution number 2 carried by 9 votes to 3. Resolution 3. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no.
No.
I declare it carried. I then come to resolution 5. This is delegating to the Chief Executive any minor tidy-ups. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I declare it carried. Resolution number 6. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. Carried. Resolution 7. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. That is carried, and I declare that passed. I think the last one, shows that everybody's needs lunch. Hey, look, these bylaws are complicated work. Can I thank colleagues for their cooperation this morning and moving our way through it. I'm just going to conclude with a karakia for lunch.
Can I say a quick thank you to the staff?
Yeah.
Because I think we quizzed today and interrogated quite hard, and I don't envy your spot, and your knowledge was incredibly helpful. Thank you.
It's a collective thank you. Note the hard work that's gone to staff on the bylaws and the managing of the process. If we could just take a moment for a karakia for the kai. Ora kai mai na kono, ka waina na I oti tūtā, hari ka mākau, hari ka mau, hari ka mana, tihei Māori ora. Lunch is served in the Waimarama room. I'm going to defer the workshop on next joyous topic of freedom camping to 1:15 to give us a good 1.5 hour